The night in the mountains was so dark it felt as though ink had spilled across the sky. Only my camera flashed in rare bursts, catching fleeting silhouettes of the trees. When I heard a twig snap behind me, my blood froze. Slowly turning, I saw him an enormous black wolf with eyes like two endless voids. He stood motionless, like a shadow, staring straight at me. My hands trembled, but I raised the camera and pressed the shutter. The flash illuminated his sleek, glistening black fur, and for a brief moment, I swore there was something human in his gaze. But the second I blinked, he was gone. Later, as I reviewed the photos, he wasn't there, not in a single frame, only me and my steps toward the mountain trail, which now seemed eerily familiar, as though it had been waiting for me all along. Chapter 1, The Wolf Under the Moon, the Appalachian Wilderness, was a quiet symphony of rustling leaves and distant whispers. Harper adjusted the strap of her camera bag as she followed the winding trail deeper into the forest. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, and the full moon above bathed everything in a silver glow. Her boots crunched softly on the frost-tipped grass, each step drawing her closer to an adventure she hadn't yet realized awaited her. Harper wasn't new to remote landscapes. She thrived on the isolation of her work, finding beauty in the untamed corners of the world. Tonight felt different, though. There was an energy in the air that set her pulse racing, a strange thrill that she couldn't quite define. As she rounded a bend, her breath caught in her throat. In the clearing ahead, a massive black wolf stood alone, its fur shimmering under the moonlight like polished obsidian. Its yellow eyes glowed with an almost otherworldly intensity, locking onto hers as if it could see straight into her soul. Instinct took over. Harper raised her camera, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The wolf didn't move, didn't flinch, as if it was meant to be captured in that exact moment. The shutter clicked once, then again. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness, but the wolf remained eerily calm. Then it howled. The mournful sound reverberated through the clearing, filling the night with a haunting beauty. A chill ran down Harper's spine, and she lowered her camera slowly. For the first time, the wolf took a step forward, its movements fluid and deliberate. Harper's pulse quickened, fear and awe battling for dominance. She didn't run. She couldn't. The wolf's eyes held her captive, as if daring her to look away. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving nothing behind but the echo of its howl. Harper stood frozen, her heart pounding. After a few moments, she fumbled to check her camera. The small preview screen displayed the photos she had taken, each one a masterpiece of light and shadow. Relief flooded her proof of the moment she had just witnessed. But as she started back toward the trail, a faint rustling in the trees reminded her she wasn't alone. The sense of being watched returned, more persistent now, but when she turned to scan the woods, there was nothing there. Just the dark, the moon, and the sound of her own breathing. She quickened her pace, eager to put distance between herself and the clearing. Yet even as she reached the small cabin she had rented for the week, the image of the black wolf lingered in her mind. The next morning, Harper woke early, eager to sort through the previous night's photos. The warmth of her coffee mug grounded her as she plugged her camera into her laptop and waited for the files to load. One by one, the pictures appeared on the screen: misty landscapes, starry skies, and finally, the clearing. Her pulse quickened as the first shot of the wolf came into view. But then it was gone. She blinked, scrolling back through the files. Where there had been a wolf, there was now only an empty clearing under the moonlight. The photos were flawless, their composition untouched, but the subject of her most striking shot had vanished entirely. "No way," Harper whispered. She unplugged the camera, pulled up the files directly, and even checked the memory card on her backup device. The result was the same: every trace of the wolf had been erased. Her frustration quickly turned to confusion. Images didn't just disappear? And yet the evidence was clear. Had she imagined it? Was it a trick of the light, some bizarre hallucination brought on by exhaustion? She shook her head, unwilling to believe her own memory could betray her so completely. Determined to find an answer, she grabbed her camera and headed out again, back to the spot where she had seen the wolf. The forest felt different in the daylight, less foreboding, more alive. Birds flitted between branches, and sunlight streamed through the canopy, illuminating the moss-covered ground. Harper found her way back to the clearing with little difficulty, her footsteps crunching on frost-dusted leaves. It was just as she remembered the open space, the way the trees framed the view of the sky, the way the light fell in perfect harmony with the shadows. But there was no sign of the wolf. Disappointment tugged at her as she lowered her camera. A part of her had hoped to see it again, to prove to herself that she hadn't imagined it. She was about to leave when she heard a voice behind her. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" Harper spun around, startled. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of a worn leather jacket. His rugged features were shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his sharp green eyes gleamed with an unsettling familiarity. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he said, stepping closer. His voice was deep, warm, but there was an edge to it that made her pulse quicken. "You don't see many people out here. I just came back to take some pictures," Harper replied, her grip tightening on her camera. Something about him felt off, though she couldn't quite place why. He tilted his head, studying her. "Did you get what you were looking for?" Her stomach churned. "Not exactly," she admitted. "I thought I saw something last night. A wolf. But the pictures didn't turn out." His expression darkened, and for a moment, his gaze flickered toward the trees, as if expecting to see someone or something watching. When his eyes returned to hers, there was a strange intensity in them. "Sometimes things out here don't like to be seen," he said, or remembered. Harper's breath caught. What's that supposed to mean? He hesitated, then extended a hand. "Name Rhett. And if you looking for answers, I might be able to help. But you might not like what you hear." For reasons she couldn't explain, Harper took his hand. His grip was strong, grounding, but the strange familiarity in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. Who was this man? And how did he seem to know exactly what she was searching for? Chapter 2, The Vanished Photo. The forest seemed quieter as Harper followed Rhett's lead, her boots crunching softly on the trail behind him. He moved with an uncanny ease, his steps barely disturbing the leaves beneath him. Harper couldn't help but notice how attuned he seemed to his surroundings, his sharp green eyes flicking toward every sound or movement in the woods. "So," she began, her voice breaking the silence, "are you from around here?" Rhett glanced back over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Born and raised. This mountain's been home my whole life." Harper adjusted the strap of her camera bag, her unease mounting. "Then maybe you can tell me what's going on." "My camera," she hesitated, debating whether she sounded ridiculous. "I swear I took pictures of that wolf. But when I checked this morning, they were gone, completely erased." Rhett stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "Gone, huh?" His gaze locked onto hers, the intensity in his eyes making her stomach flip. "That doesn't surprise me." Harper frowned. "It doesn't. Are you saying that's normal?" He ran a hand through his dark hair, glancing at the trees as though searching for the right words. "Not normal. Not for most people anyway. But that wolf you saw at's not just any wolf." Harper's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? It looked real enough to me." "Oh, it's real," Rhett said, his voice low. "More real than you know. But it doesn't belong in your world, Harper." Her heart skipped a beat at the sound of her name. "How do you know who I am?" Rhett's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked as though he might deflect the question. Then he sighed, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "It wasn't hard to figure out. Not many people come up here alone with a camera and a lot of questions. Your name's in the guest registry at the cabin rental, and I make it my business to know who's on this mountain." The explanation made sense, but something about his tone suggested there was more to the story. Harper crossed her arms. And what do you mean, it doesn't belong in my world? Are you saying it as supernatural? Supernatural, Rhett repeated with a slight smirk. That's one way to put it. Harper stared at him, waiting for a laugh or some indication that he was joking, but his expression remained deadly serious. Okay then. Let us say I believe you for a second. What's the deal with this wolf? And why do my photos keep disappearing? Rhett hesitated, his eyes scanning the treetops. Finally, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That wolf what you saw last night is tied to this place. To the moon, the woods, and everything that came before us. It's old magic, Harper. The kind that doesn't care about your technology or your rules. It's not meant to be captured or preserved. The moment you took those photos, the mountain took them back. Harper's pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and fascination swirling in her chest. Magic, she repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. You retelling me there's magic in these mountains? That this wolf is some kind of magical creature? It's not just a creature, Rhett said, his voice hardening. It's part of a curse. A curse that's been passed down for generations. Something in his tone made her pause. He wasn't speaking abstractly. He was speaking from experience. You talking about yourself, aren't you? Rhett's lips pressed into a thin line, his silence confirming what Harper already suspected. She felt a rush of disbelief, her mind racing to make sense of what she was hearing. Wait, she said, stepping back. Are you saying you re the wolf? Her voice faltered as she replayed the memory of the previous night. The way the wolf had looked at her, its gaze piercing and intelligent. It wasn't just an animal. It had felt human. Rhett took a step closer, his expression unreadable. You weren't supposed to see me, he said softly. And you definitely weren't supposed to take that picture. Harper's chest tightened. Why not? What happens if I do? Because Rhett said, his voice dark, when people see me like that, they usually bring trouble with them. Hunters, scientists, people who didn't understand what I am or what's at stake. Harper blinked. Hunters, you mean like people trying to kill you? He nodded. It's happened before, and it will happen again. That's why I stay out here away from the world. I didn't need anyone else getting hurt. The weight of his words settled over her, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. The idea of a man turning into a wolf, of a curse and hunters, felt impossible. And yet the more she looked at Rhett, the more it all made a strange kind of sense. His piercing gaze, the way he moved, even the unshakable familiarity she felt when she first met him, it all pointed to something extraordinary. Okay, she said finally, her voice trembling. Let us say I believe you. What am I supposed to do now? Pretend I didn't see anything? Just go back to my life like none of this ever happened. Rhett's eyes softened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his expression. I don't know, he admitted. But if you're going to stay here, you need to be careful. The wolf you saw at's not the only thing in these woods. And if they find out you asking questions, they'll come for you too. Harper's stomach churned. Who's they? The hunters, Rhett said, his tone grim. They don't care if you're innocent. If they think you reconnected to me, you're a target. Harper's heart raced, the reality of his warning sinking in. She had come to these mountains searching for beauty, for inspiration. She hadn't expected to find danger or to meet a man who blurred the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. But now that she was here, there was no turning back. The black wolf, the vanished photo, and Rhett's cryptic warnings, they were all part of a mystery she couldn't walk away from. I'll be careful, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. But I am not leaving. Not until I figure out what's really going on here. Rhett's lips quirked into a faint smile, though his eyes remained cautious. Then I guess you'd better stick close to me. And with that, he turned, leading her deeper into the forest toward answers she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Chapter 3. A stranger in town, the small mountain town of Ash Hollow was nestled in a valley shrouded by ancient pines, its few streets lined with rustic shops and weathered homes. Harper followed Rhett's truck down the winding road, her thoughts racing as she tried to process everything he had told her. Magic, a curse, hunters. It all sounded impossible, but the missing photo on her camera and the undeniable presence of the wolf in her memory told her otherwise. Rhett's truck rumbled to a stop in front of a diner with a hand-painted sign reading Gracie S. He climbed out, motioning for her to follow. Harper parked her car and hesitated for a moment before stepping out. The air smelled of coffee and freshly baked bread, mingling with the faint scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Rhett held the door open for her, and she stepped inside. The diner was cozy, with red vinyl booths and a long counter where locals chatted over steaming cups of coffee. Heads turned as they entered, and Harper felt the weight of curious eyes on her. "Who's that with you, Rhett?" A woman behind the counter called out. She was in her 60s, her gray hair tied back in a loose bun, and her sharp eyes flicked between them with interest. "This is Harper," Rhett said, his voice steady but tinged with an edge of reluctance. "She's staying up at one of the cabins for a few days." Harper smiled politely, but the woman's gaze lingered on her, as if trying to read her intentions. "Well, welcome to Ash Hollow, Harper. I am Gracie. Let me know if you need anything while you here." "Thanks," Harper said, sliding into a booth as Rhett gestured for her to sit. Gracie brought over 2 coffees without asking and placed them on the table. Rhett nodded his thanks, but she lingered, her expression turning serious. "You keep your head down out there, Rhett," she said softly. "There's been talk of people coming through the woods again." Not the friendly kind. Rhett's jaw tightened. "I know." Gracie glanced at Harper, her expression skeptical but not unkind. "You make sure he listens to me, sweetheart. This mountain's no place for trouble." "I'll do my best," Harper said, though she had no idea what that even meant. Gracie gave a curt nod and returned to the counter, leaving Harper and Rhett in a bubble of tense silence. "Is she always like that?" Harper asked, her fingers wrapping around the warm mug. "She means well," Rhett said, staring out the window as if lost in thought. "But she's right. People have been coming through the woods. People like the ones I told you about. The hunters," Harper said, lowering her voice. Rhett nodded, his expression dark. "They not just after me. They after anything that doesn't fit their idea of what should exist. Magic, creatures, anything tied to the old ways. If they think you involved," he trailed off, his green eyes locking onto hers. "I need you to understand how dangerous this is." "I get it," Harper said, though the weight of his warning pressed heavily on her chest. "But I am not leaving, Rhett. I came here for a reason, and it's not just about taking pretty pictures anymore." Rhett studied her, his gaze piercing. For a moment, Harper thought he might argue, but then he nodded. "If you staying, we need to make sure you ready." "Ready for what?" "For what's coming," he said simply. Later that day, Rhett insisted on taking Harper back into the woods, his demeanor shifting into something more serious, almost protective. He walked ahead of her, his sharp gaze scanning the trees for any sign of trouble. "Do you feel it?" he asked suddenly, stopping in a small clearing. Harper frowned. "Feel what?" "The mountain," Rhett said, gesturing around them. "The energy here. It's alive." Harper took a deep breath, letting the quiet wash over her. At first, all she noticed was the wind rustling the branches and the faint hum of insects. But as she closed her eyes, a deeper sensation began to creep in, a subtle vibration beneath her feet, a warmth that seemed to radiate from the earth itself. "I think I do," she said softly, opening her eyes. Rhett's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Good. That means you repaying attention. Most people go through life completely blind to what's around them." Harper's curiosity surged. "How did you learn all of this? The magic, the mountain, everything." "It's in my blood," Rhett said, his voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "My family's been tied to this land for generations. The cursed's as much a part of me as the air I breathe. Is there any way to break it?" Harper asked, her heart aching at the weight of his words. Rhett's jaw clenched and he looked away. "If there is, no one's found it yet. and IV stopped trying. Harper wanted to press him further, but the pain in his expression stopped her. Instead, she changed the subject. What about the hunters? How do they know about you? They've been around for centuries, Rhett said, his tone hardening. They hunt anything they don't understand. They see us as monsters, threats to their way of life. They don't care about the truth. Harper shivered. Have they ever caught you? Rhett's eyes darkened, and for a moment he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. Once, a long time ago. I got out, but not before I lost people I cared about. That's why I stay away from towns, from people. It's easier that way. Harper's heart ached for him, but she could see the resolve in his eyes. He had built walls around himself, walls he believed were necessary to keep the world at bay. But those walls were starting to crack. Maybe you didn't have to be alone, she said softly. Rhett's gaze met hers, and for a moment the air between them seemed to hum with unspoken words. But before either of them could speak, a distant howl shattered the silence, its mournful cry echoing through the trees. Rhett tensed, his entire body going still. We need to go, he said, his voice urgent. What is it? Harper asked, her heart pounding. Trouble, Rhett said, already moving, and it's coming fast. Harper didn't need to be told twice. She followed him, her pulse racing as the forest seemed to close in around them. Whatever was out there, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't ready for it. Chapter 4, Secrets in the Woods. The howl echoed through the woods again, longer and closer this time. Harper's legs burned as she struggled to keep up with Rhett's effortless stride. The man moved like he was part of the forest itself, weaving between trees and over uneven ground without missing a step. She stumbled over a hidden root and caught herself against a tree, gasping for breath. Rhett, wait, she called, her voice barely above a whisper. He stopped and turned, his sharp green eyes scanning her face. We can stay here. It's not safe. What's out there? Harper asked, her voice shaking. Rhett hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. Wolves, but not like me. What does that mean? It means they don't have any rules, he said grimly. They feral, unpredictable. If they've picked up our scent, they won't stop until they find us. Harper's stomach churned. She thought back to the black wolf she had seen under the moonlight. Despite its size and power, there had been something controlled about it, something almost noble. Whatever Rhett was describing now didn't sound anything like that. We're close to a spot I know, Rhett said, jerking his head toward the trail. If we get there before they do, we'll be fine. And if we don't? Rhett's expression darkened. Then we run, and we don't stop. The hidden hollow Rhett led her to a narrow ravine that cut through the forest like a scar. He motioned for her to follow him down a steep incline, the loose dirt and rocks slipping under their feet. Harper clung to tree trunks and branches to steady herself as they descended into the shadows. At the bottom, the air felt cooler, heavier. Towering cliffs surrounded them on three sides, their jagged edges silhouetted against the fading light of the late afternoon. The sound of rushing water echoed faintly, and Harper realized there was a stream running through the hollow, its surface glittering like silver. Rhett crouched near a cluster of rocks and began sifting through the underbrush. Harper approached cautiously, her nerves on edge. What are we doing? Covering our tracks, Rhett said. He pulled a handful of dried leaves from the ground and crushed them in his hands, releasing a sharp, pungent smell. This will mask our scent. Help me scatter it around. Harper obeyed, grabbing handfuls of the leaves and spreading them along the path they had taken. The work gave her something to focus on, but her hands trembled as she moved. When they were done, Rhett stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. This place will keep us hidden for now, he said. They don't like coming down here. Why not? Harper asked, glancing nervously at the cliffs. Rhett's gaze shifted to the stream, his expression unreadable. Because this place is older than they are, older than me, Harper frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Rhett said, his voice low, that this mountain has its own rules, its own guardians. The wolves might be strong, but even they know better than to cross certain lines. Harper opened her mouth to ask another question, but the sound of snapping branches cut her off. Rhett stiffened, his head tilting slightly as if he were listening to something she couldn't hear. His entire body tensed, and for the first time, Harper saw something animalistic in his posture, a predator assessing its prey. "They rehear," he said, his voice barely audible. Harper's heart slammed against her ribs. She scanned the ravine, her eyes darting between the shadows, but she saw nothing. "Where? Stay low," Rhett whispered, and didn't he make a sound. He crouched behind a large boulder, pulling her down beside him. Harper's breathing was shallow, her ears straining for any hint of movement. Then she heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, rolled through the air like thunder. It wasn't too close, but it wasn't too far either. Harper's pulse quickened, and she gripped the camera bag slung over her shoulder as if it could somehow protect her. Rhett's hand brushed her arm, drawing her attention. "If they come down here, you run," he murmured. "Follow the stream and don't stop until you reach the road. Understand?" "What about you?" Harper whispered back, her throat tight. "Don't worry about me," Rhett said, his gaze locked on the cliff's edge above them. "Just go." Harper wanted to argue, but another growl silenced her. This one was closer, the sound reverberating through the hollow like an ominous warning. The wolf pack Harper's breath caught as a shadow appeared at the top of the ravine. At first, she thought it was just one wolf, but then another emerged from the trees. And another. There were 5 of them in total, their sleek black forms outlined against the fading light. Their yellow eyes glowed with a feral intensity, and their low growls blended into a haunting symphony. Harper's fingers tightened around her camera bag, her mind racing. The wolves were enormous, larger than any she had ever seen in documentaries or wildlife magazines. Their presence was suffocating, their sheer size and power a reminder of just how small and fragile she was. Rhett shifted beside her, drawing the wolves' attention. One of them stepped closer to the edge, its gaze locking onto his. "Stay here," Rhett said under his breath. Then, before Harper could stop him, he rose to his feet. The wolves tensed, their growls growing louder, but Rhett didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his movements calm and deliberate. "I know you can hear me," he said, his voice steady but commanding. "This place isn't yours. Leave." The lead wolf snarled, baring its teeth, and Harper felt a surge of panic. Whatever Rhett was trying to do, it wasn't working. Then something strange happened. Rhett's posture shifted, his shoulders squaring as a ripple of energy seemed to pulse through him. His green eyes glinted with an otherworldly light, and for a moment Harper thought she saw the faint outline of something larger, something wilder, surrounding him like a shadow. The wolves hesitated, their snarls faltering. "Go!" Rhett growled, his voice taking on a deep, guttural tone that sent chills down Harper's spine. The pack wavered, their ferocity replaced by uncertainty. One by one, they backed away, retreating into the trees until the hollow was silent once more. A fragile calm, Harper stared at Rhett, her heart pounding in her chest. What the hell was that? Rhett turned to her, his expression weary but resolute. "It's what I was trying to tell you. They know me and they know not to push too far." Harper struggled to find the right words, her mind spinning. She had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied everything she thought she knew about the natural world. "You scared them off," she said finally, her voice shaky. "How?" Rhett's lips quirked into a faint, humorless smile. "Because I am more dangerous than they are." Before Harper could press him further, he motioned for her to follow. "Come on. We've got a long walk back, and it'll be dark soon." Harper hesitated, glancing back at the cliff where the wolves had stood. The shadows seemed deeper now, as if the forest itself was watching her. As she followed Rhett up the ravine, one thought burned in her mind: she was in way over her head, and there was no turning back. Chapter 5. The wolf's warning. The walk back to the cabin was a blur of shadows and hushed movements. Harper stayed close to Rhett, her pulse racing as every sound in the woods seemed amplified: the crackle of branches, the whisper of wind, the faint rustle of unseen creatures. The memory of the wolves' glowing eyes burned in her mind, a vivid reminder of how close they had come to danger. By the time they reached the edge of the clearing where her cabin stood, the sky was painted in the deep blues and purples of twilight. Rhett stopped at the tree line, his gaze sweeping the area before he turned to her. "You'll be safe here," he said, though his tone lacked the reassurance she hoped for. Harper crossed her arms, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Safe, after what just happened? Rhett, I need answers. What were those wolves? Why are they after us?" Rhett sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They re part of the curse," he said finally. "When I turned, it wasn't just me. The magic that binds me to this mountain affects others too. But not all of us handled it the same way." Harper frowned. "Handled it? What does that mean?" "Some of us kept our humanity," Rhett said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Others gave in to the wolf. They lost themselves, became nothing more than animals driven by instinct and rage. Those are the ones you saw tonight." Harper stared at him, the weight of his words settling over her like a fog. "And the hunters? Are they after you because of the curse too?" "They don't care about curses," Rhett said bitterly. "They see us all as monsters, no matter how much of our humanity we've managed to hold on to. To them, we read just threats that need to be eliminated." A chill ran down Harper's spine as she recalled the sharp intensity in the wolves' eyes. It was hard to imagine anything more dangerous than them, but the idea of hunters tracking Rhett, treating him as prey, sent a pang of anger through her. "That's not fair," she said, her voice shaking. "You're not like them. You're not a monster." Rhett's gaze softened, and for a moment his guard seemed to lower. "You don't know that," he said quietly. "Not really." Harper opened her mouth to argue, but he held up a hand, silencing her. "Look, I didn't want you to get caught up in this any more than you already are. You've got a life to go back to. Just lay low for a few days, then leave this place behind." "No," Harper said firmly, surprising even herself. "I am not going anywhere. I told you I am staying until I figure out what's going on." Rhett shook his head, a mix of frustration and admiration flickering across his face. "You're stubborn, you know that? Somebody has to be," she shot back. Rhett chuckled softly, though the sound lacked humor. "Fine," he said. "But if you're staying, you need to promise me something." "What? If things get bad, if the hunters come, or the wolves don't try to be a hero? You run. Understand?" Harper hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't sure she could make that promise, but the intensity in his eyes told her he wouldn't take no for an answer. "Okay," she said reluctantly. "I'll be careful." Rhett nodded, though he didn't seem entirely convinced. "Good. Now get some rest. You're going to need it." The wolf's call that night, Harper lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in her mind. Every detail felt surreal: the glowing eyes of the wolves, the strange power that had radiated from Rhett, the way the forest seemed alive with an energy she couldn't quite explain. Her camera sat on the nightstand, the memory card inside still missing the photo that had started it all. She reached for it, turning it over in her hands. She had taken hundreds of photos in her career, capturing moments that told stories far beyond what words could convey. But this was different. This wasn't a story she could walk away from. A low, mournful howl pierced the silence, sending a shiver down her spine. Harper sat up, her heart pounding. She moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer outside. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, the tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. At first, it seemed empty, but then, at the edge of the trees, a shadow moved. It was the black wolf. Harper's breath caught. The wolf stood motionless, its eyes glowing like twin embers in the darkness. It watched her for what felt like an eternity, its presence both unnerving and oddly reassuring. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The wolf didn't move, but something in its gaze seemed to shift. There was a depth there, a sense of purpose that made her chest tighten. It wasn't just an animal. It was Rhett. Before she could think better of it, Harper slipped on her boots and grabbed her coat. Quietly, she opened the door and stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around her. The wolf didn't flinch as she approached. It stood perfectly still, its massive form silhouetted against the trees. Harper stopped a few feet away, her heart hammering in her chest. "Rhett," she asked softly. The wolf blinked, and for a moment she thought she saw something familiar in its eyes. But then it turned and disappeared into the forest, its dark form blending seamlessly with the shadows. Harper stared after it, her mind racing. She didn't know what Rhett or the wolf was trying to tell her, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just his story anymore. It was hers too. And whatever secrets the mountain held, she was determined to uncover them. Chapter 6, A World Beyond Reason. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden patches across the wooden floor of Harper's cabin. She sat at the small table, her coffee growing cold as she stared at her camera. Despite the clarity of the previous night's encounter, questions swirled in her mind. What did the wolf want? Why had it come to her cabin only to vanish? The weight of the mysteries surrounding Rhett, the wolves, and this cursed mountain pressed heavily on her, making it impossible to focus on anything else. With a resolute breath, she grabbed her gear and headed out the door. If the answers weren't going to come to her, she'd find them herself. Retracing the path, Harper followed the trail, leading to the clearing where she had first seen the black wolf. The woods were alive with the sounds of nature, but beneath the chirping birds and rustling leaves, she felt the same faint hum of energy Rhett had spoken of, a thrumming pulse that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath her feet. When she reached the clearing, she paused, taking in the scene. It looked exactly as it had the first night, the open expanse framed by ancient trees, the golden light of the sun spilling through the canopy. But now, standing in the middle of it, she could feel how different it truly was. There was something sacred about this place, something that demanded respect. She pulled out her camera, snapping a few photos despite the lingering unease in her chest. The clearing felt charged, as though the wolf's presence had left a permanent mark. As she lowered her camera, a voice broke the silence behind her. "You shouldn't be here alone." Harper turned sharply to see Rhett leaning against a tree, his arms crossed and his green eyes watching her intently. "Do you always sneak up on people like that?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "Only when they ignoring good advice," Rhett said, pushing off the tree and stepping closer. "I told you this place isn't safe." "I needed to see it again," Harper said defensively. "This is where everything started," and I thought. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I thought it might help me understand what's happening." Rhett's expression softened slightly. "And did it?" "Not really," Harper admitted. "If anything, I have more questions now than I did before." Rhett sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," Harper said firmly. "I want to know what's really going on here. And you're the only one who can tell me." The truth about the curse. Rhett hesitated, his gaze shifting to the clearing as though it held memories only he could see. Finally, he motioned for Harper to sit on a fallen log near the edge of the trees. "There's a lot you don't know about this mountain," he began, his voice low and measured. "And it's not the kind of thing you'll find in books or on maps. The magic here it's old. Older than the towns, older than the people who came here to settle. It runs through the land, the trees, even the animals. But it doesn't just give, it takes. Takes how?" Harper asked, leaning forward. Rhett's jaw tightened. "A long time ago, my family made a deal. A stupid, desperate deal. They needed the mountain's help to survive a harsh winter, food, shelter, protection from the elements. And the mountain gave it to them, but there was a price." "What kind of price?" Rhett's eyes darkened. "A curse. The firstborn of every generation would be bound to the mountain's magic. Half human, half wolf. A guardian of the land, but also a prisoner. We retied to it, Harper. We can leave normal lives. And every full moon, the wolf takes over, whether we want it to or not. Harper's breath caught. That's what happened to you. Rhett nodded. I was 20 when it happened. One night I was just me. The next, I woke up in the woods, covered in blood and dirt, with no memory of how I got there. It took years to control the shift, to keep the wolf in check. And even now, I am not always sure who's in control. Harper stared at him, her heart aching at the weight of his words. That's why you stay out here, to protect people. And to protect myself, Rhett said. The wolf isn't evil, but it's not human. It doesn't care about right or wrong, it just is. And if I lose control, people get hurt. So I keep my distance. It's better that way. An unsettling revelation. Harper sat in silence, the enormity of Rhett's story settling over her. She thought of the black wolf she had seen under the moonlight, its piercing eyes and undeniable presence. It was hard to reconcile that creature with the man sitting before her, but at the same time, it made perfect sense. What about the other wolves? She asked. The ones we saw last night, are they like you? Rhett shook his head. Not anymore. They were once, but they've lost themselves to the curse. They gave up their humanity and became feral. They redrawn to the mountain-s power, but they can control it. That's why they read dangerous. And the hunters? They've been around as long as the wolves, Rhett said. Some of them are just regular people, scared, superstitious, trying to protect their families. Others, he hesitated, his expression darkening. Others know exactly what they're redoing. They hunt for sport, for power. They didn't see us as people, just trophies. Harper shivered. How do you survive out here knowing they're always after you? Rhett gave her a wry smile. I've had a lot of practice. She couldn't imagine what that kind of life must be like, always looking over your shoulder, always fighting to stay one step ahead of those who wanted to kill you. But as she looked at Rhett, she saw more than just a man weighed down by a curse. She saw strength, resilience, and a fierce determination to protect the world he had been bound to. A warning from the woods, the sound of snapping branches jolted them both, and Rhett was on his feet in an instant, his eyes scanning the trees. Stay behind me, he said, his voice sharp. Harper grabbed her camera bag and stood, her pulse racing. What is it? I didn't know, Rhett murmured, his stance tense. The woods fell eerily silent, the usual hum of birds and insects replaced by an oppressive stillness. Harper's breath caught as a low growl rumbled through the trees. Rhett's expression hardened. We need to move. Now. Where a shadow darted through the trees, too fast for her to track. Harper's heart slammed against her ribs as another growl echoed, this one closer. Run, Rhett said, his voice deadly calm. Go back to the cabin and lock the door. Don't stop, no matter what you hear. What about you? Harper asked, panic rising in her chest. I'll be fine, Rhett said, his green eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Go. Before she could argue, another shadow lunged toward them, and Rhett sprang into action, his body moving with a speed and grace that defied human limits. Harper didn't wait to see what happened next. She turned and ran, the sound of snarls and snapping branches chasing her into the woods. As she sprinted back toward the cabin, one thought echoed in her mind: the mountain-s secrets were far darker than she had imagined, and she was only just beginning to uncover them. Chapter 7, The Wolf's Curse. Harper burst into the cabin, her chest heaving as she slammed the door shut and locked it. Her trembling hands fumbled to secure the deadbolt, and she pressed her back against the wood, her ears straining for any sound outside. The forest was silent, too silent. Her mind raced, replaying the flashes of movement and guttural snarls she had witnessed in the clearing. Rhett had stayed behind, and every instinct in her screamed to go back and help him. But how? What could she possibly do against wolves that were faster, stronger, and deadlier than anything she had ever encountered? She forced herself to take a breath, her fingers digging into the doorframe for support. Rhett had told her to run, and she had listened. Now all she could do was wait. Her eyes fell on her camera bag, discarded on the floor in her rush to escape. On impulse, she grabbed it, hoping to distract herself. If she couldn't help Rhett, maybe she could make sense of the pieces of the puzzle she'd gathered so far. Sitting at the small kitchen table, she pulled out her camera and scrolled through the photos she'd taken earlier in the clearing. Most of them were as expected, golden light streaming through the trees, the faint mist rising from the grass. But then she froze. One of the frames wasn't empty. There, in the corner of the shot, was the faint outline of a figure, a shadow barely visible against the trees. Harper's heart skipped as she zoomed in, the grainy image becoming clearer. It wasn't a wolf. It was human-shaped, tall and broad, with eyes that glowed faintly yellow. "Rhett," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Had he been watching her the whole time, or was it something else? Before she could think further, a loud thud sounded against the door and Harper jumped, dropping the camera. The sound came again, this time followed by a low growl. Her breath caught. Something was outside. The hunter becomes the prey. Harper crept toward the window, careful to stay low. She peered through the curtain, her heart hammering in her chest. At first, she saw nothing but shadows and the soft sway of the trees. But then, a shape moved. It was a wolf larger than any she had seen, its black fur blending seamlessly with the night. Its glowing eyes swept over the cabin, and Harper ducked away from the window, pressing herself against the wall. The wolf circled the cabin, its claws clicking against the wooden porch. Harper clutched the edge of the counter, her mind racing. This wasn't Rhett. She could feel it in the air, the sheer malice radiating from the creature. Another thud rattled the door, and this time the wood groaned under the force. Harper's gaze darted to the fireplace poker leaning against the hearth, a poor weapon, but better than nothing. She grabbed it, holding it tightly as the wolf growled outside. A loud crash shattered the stillness as one of the windows burst inward, sending glass flying across the floor. Harper screamed, stumbling back as the wolf's massive form pushed through the opening. It was even more terrifying up close, its eyes blazing with feral rage. Drool dripped from its bared teeth as it snarled, stalking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Harper raised the poker, her hands shaking. "Stay back." She shouted, though her voice wavered. The wolf didn't stop. Before it could lunge, a blur of motion shot through the broken window, slamming into the wolf with a force that shook the cabin. The two figures tumbled to the floor in a whirlwind of claws and snarls. "Rhett," Harper breathed, relief flooding her as she recognized the familiar black fur and piercing green eyes of the second wolf. The two creatures grappled, their growls reverberating through the small cabin. Rhett was faster, his movements precise and controlled, but the other wolf was relentless, its sheer size and ferocity giving it an edge. Harper scrambled back, clutching the poker as the fight raged on. The wolves collided with furniture, overturning chairs and shattering the coffee table. Harper's eyes darted to the front door. She could run, but she couldn't leave Rhett. The fight reached a fever pitch as Rhett drove the other wolf into the wall, pinning it with his massive paws. His jaws snapped dangerously close to its throat, and for a moment, Harper thought it was over. But the other wolf twisted, using its weight to throw Rhett off balance. It lunged, its teeth sinking into Rhett's shoulder, and he let out a pained snarl. Harper acted on instinct. She raised the poker and swung with all her might, the metal colliding with the side of the attacking wolf's head. It yelped, releasing Rhett and stumbling back. Rhett didn't waste the opportunity. With a guttural growl, he surged forward, driving the other wolf out of the cabin and into the yard. Harper rushed to the door, watching as the two wolves disappeared into the darkness, their snarls fading into the distance. Aftermath. Harper stood in the doorway, her heart pounding as the night fell silent once more. The yard was empty, save for the shattered remains of the window and the claw marks gouged into the porch. "Rhett," she called hesitantly, her voice trembling. A moment later, a figure emerged from the trees, not the wolf, but the man. Rhett's shirt was torn and bloodied, his face pale, but his green eyes burned with an intensity that stopped her breath. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Harper nodded, though her hands still shook. "What about you? You re-hurt." "It's nothing," Rhett said, brushing off her concern. "That one tea bother us again." Harper stepped closer, her anger and fear bubbling to the surface. "You call that nothing? You re-bleeding, Rhett? And what about my cabin?" That thing nearly tore it apart. Rhett's gaze softened. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "This is why I told you to leave." Harper opened her mouth to argue, but the exhaustion in his voice stopped her. He wasn't just apologizing for tonight, he was apologizing for all of it. For the danger he had brought into her life, for the curse he couldn't escape. She took a deep breath, her anger ebbing. "I am not leaving," she said firmly. "So stop asking me to." Rhett's lips quirked into a faint, tired smile. "You're as stubborn as the mountain." Harper crossed her arms. "Guess you'll just have to get used to it." The faintest hint of a laugh escaped him, but it quickly turned into a grimace as he clutched his injured shoulder. "Come on," Harper said, taking his arm. "Let us get you cleaned up." Rhett didn't protest as she led him inside. The cabin was a mess, and the lingering tension in the air was palpable. But for the first time since she had arrived in Ash Hollow, Harper felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever this curse was, whatever danger lay ahead, she wasn't going to face it from the sidelines. She was in this now, whether Rhett liked it or not. Chapter 8, Shadows of the Past. The cabin was quiet save for the crackle of the fire Harper had managed to rekindle. She had cleared the broken glass from the window and pushed the remains of the shattered table into the corner. Now she focused on Rhett, who sat shirtless at the edge of the bed, his broad shoulders hunched and his face etched with pain. "This might sting," Harper warned, holding a damp cloth over a basin of warm water. Rhett smirked faintly, though the weariness in his eyes was impossible to miss. "I think I can handle it." She dabbed the cloth against the bite wound on his shoulder, and Rhett flinched despite himself. The wound was deep, the edges jagged, but it wasn't bleeding as much as she had expected. Harper worked carefully, her hands steady despite the lingering adrenaline coursing through her. "I thought werewolves had faster healing," she said, breaking the silence. "We do," Rhett replied, his voice gruff, "but it depends on the wound. If it's from another wolf, especially one tied to the curse, it takes longer. Magic messes with the process." Harper frowned, rinsing the cloth before pressing it against the wound again. "That thing was relentless. Why was it after you?" Rhett hesitated, his gaze fixed on the flames in the fireplace. "It wasn't just after me. It was after us." "What do you mean?" Harper asked, her brow furrowing. "They can sense when someone new is connected to the mountain," Rhett explained, his voice low. "You saw the wolf under the full moon, Harper. That means the mountain has marked you in some way. They think you part of this now." Harper stared at him, her hand faltering. "That's ridiculous. I am just a photographer. I am not connected to any of this." Rhett turned his gaze to hers, his green eyes shadowed with something deeper, regret, maybe, or fear. "You are now," he said softly. The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. She wanted to argue, to insist that she could walk away from all of this if she chose to. But deep down, she knew he was right. The moment she had seen the black wolf under the full moon, her life had changed irrevocably. A glimpse into Rhett's past when Rhett's wound was cleaned and bandaged. Harper sank into the armchair across from him, her exhaustion catching up with her. Rhett sat on the bed, the firelight casting long shadows across his face. "Can I ask you something?" Harper ventured after a long silence. Rhett glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Depends on the question. Those wolves we saw earlier, the feral ones. You said they were people once. Do you know any of them?" Rhett's jaw tightened, and for a moment Harper thought he wouldn't answer. But then he nodded, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah," he said quietly. "One of them was my brother." Harper's breath caught. "Your brother? I didn't know you had family." "I don't anymore," Rhett said, his voice hollow. "My brother Mason was 3 years older than me. He turned before I did. I looked up to him, thought he could teach me how to handle the curse. But he couldn't handle it himself. The magic consumed him, twisted him. He gave in to the wolf completely, and when that happens, he trailed off, his throat working as he swallowed hard. You lose who you are," Harper finished softly. Rhett nodded. "Mason wasn't the only one. I've seen it happen to others, 2 people I cared about, people who didn't deserve it. That's why I keep my distance. It's safer that way." Harper's chest ached for him. She couldn't imagine the pain of watching someone you loved lose themselves so completely, or the isolation that came with trying to protect everyone around you. "Do you think it could happen to you?" she asked gently. Rhett's eyes darkened. "I don't know. I'd like to think I am stronger than that, but the truth is, no one's immune. The mountain takes what it wants. All I can do is fight to keep the wolf in check." Harper leaned forward, her voice firm. "You're stronger than you think, Rhett. I've seen it. You're still here, still fighting. That has to count for something." Rhett held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Maybe," he said finally, "but fighting doesn't mean winning, not out here." An ominous discovery the next morning, Harper woke to find Rhett gone. Panic flared in her chest, but a note on the kitchen table eased her fear. "Went to check the perimeter. Stay inside." Harper sighed, frustration mingling with concern. She hated the idea of sitting idle while Rhett put himself at risk. But after everything he had told her, she couldn't blame him for being cautious. She spent the morning cleaning up the cabin, trying to restore some semblance of normalcy. But as the hours stretched on and Rhett didn't return, her unease grew. By midday, she couldn't wait any longer. Ignoring his instructions, she grabbed her camera and set out into the woods. The trail was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of birds and insects absent. Harper kept her camera ready, snapping photos of the trees and the faint paths winding through the undergrowth. As she ventured deeper, she came across something that made her blood run cold. A clearing lay ahead, its grass flattened and darkened with patches of dried blood. Claw marks gouged the trees, their splintered wood a testament to the ferocity of whatever had taken place here. Harper crouched down, her camera clicking as she documented the scene. It was clear this had been a fight, one far more brutal than what she had seen in the cabin. "What are you doing here?" The voice startled her, and she spun around to see Rhett standing at the edge of the clearing, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. "I was looking for you," Harper said, standing. "What happened here?" Rhett's gaze darkened as he surveyed the scene. "The wolves," he said grimly. "This is their work." "They resending a message. A message to who?" Harper asked, her throat tightening. "To me," Rhett said, his voice cold. "And to you." Harper's stomach churned as she followed his gaze to the claw marks on the nearest tree. They weren't random. They formed a crude symbol, a jagged circle with an X through it. "What does it mean?" she asked. Rhett's expression was grim. "It means they know you're with me, and they won't stop until one of us is gone." Harper swallowed hard, her grip tightening on her camera. The danger she had sensed since arriving in Ash Hollow was no longer abstract, it was a shadow looming over her, growing darker by the moment. But as fear settled in her chest, another feeling rose to the surface: determination. "I am not running," she said firmly, meeting Rhett's gaze. Rhett stared at her for a long moment, his green eyes searching hers. Finally, he nodded. "Then we'd better be ready." And as they left the clearing, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain itself was watching, its ancient magic stirring in response to what was to come. Chapter 9. The hunter's trail. The air in Ash Hollow carried a sharp chill as Harper and Rhett returned to the cabin. Harper's mind raced, the ominous clearing they had left behind etched vividly in her memory. The clawed symbol on the tree wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. Rhett locked the door behind them, his expression grim. "This changes everything," he said, pacing the small living room. The wolves are escalating. They've never been this bold before. Harper crossed her arms, trying to steady her nerves. Why now? What's different? Rhett hesitated, his green eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't know. Maybe it's because of you. Her stomach dropped. Me, you're an outsider, Rhett said. And the mountain doesn't like outsiders, especially ones who've seen what you've seen. The wolves think you a threat, Harper. And they not wrong. Because of the photo? Harper asked, glancing at her camera. Because you part of this now, Rhett said, his tone sharp. Whether you want to be or not. A new kind of threat later that evening, Harper sat at the table, staring at the photos she had taken in the clearing. She had uploaded them to her laptop, zooming in on every detail of the bloodstains, the claw marks, the symbol etched into the tree. But it was the edges of the images that caught her attention. In several frames, faint shapes moved among the shadows, too blurry to identify but unmistakably there. Do you see this? She asked, calling Rhett over. He leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing as he studied the screen. Those Aaron T. wolves, he said after a moment. Then what are they? Hunters, Rhett said grimly. Harper's breath caught. Hunters, you mean they were watching us? Looks like it, Rhett said, his jaw tightening. They getting closer. And if they figured out you with me, we both in danger. Harper sat back, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had expected the wolves to be the biggest threat, but now the hunters were in play, too, and their motives were even more terrifying. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rhett straightened, his expression hardening. We stay ahead of them. The wolves and the hunters both. If either of them catches us, it's over. A desperate plan the next morning, Rhett woke Harper early, his demeanor tense but determined. We going to the caves, he said, handing her a small backpack filled with supplies. Harper frowned, pulling on her jacket. What caves? They hidden in the mountains, Rhett explained as they set out on foot. Old places, tied to the magic of the land. If we going to figure out what's happening, why the wolves are acting like this, why the hunters are closing in, it's the best place to start. Harper followed him up the steep trail, the forest growing denser with every step. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to loom closer together, their twisted branches blotting out the sky. Have you been there before? She asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Once, Rhett said, years ago when I was first trying to understand the curse. The caves are dangerous, but they hold answers you won't find anywhere else. Harper shivered, though she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or his ominous tone. The entrance to the caves was marked by a jagged rock formation, its dark mouth yawning open like a warning. Harper hesitated at the threshold, the faint sound of dripping water echoing from within. Stay close, Rhett said, his voice steady but firm. The mountain-s magic is stronger here. You'll feel it. Harper stepped inside, her boots crunching on loose stones. The air was damp and cool, carrying a metallic tang that set her nerves on edge. She followed Rhett as he led her deeper, the faint glow of his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the cavern walls. The further they went, the stronger the sensation became, a thrumming pulse that seemed to emanate from the very rock around them. It was the same feeling Harper had noticed in the clearing, but here it was amplified, resonating through her bones. Do you feel that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rhett nodded. The mountain-s magic. It's alive here more than anywhere else. They rounded a corner and Harper froze. The cavern opened into a vast chamber, its walls lined with ancient carvings. Symbols and figures were etched into the stone, their meaning unclear but unmistakably deliberate. In the center of the chamber, a pool of water shimmered, its surface unnaturally still. What is this place? Harper asked, her voice tinged with awe. Rhett's expression was somber. It's where the curse began. A dangerous revelation. Harper approached the carvings, her camera in hand. She snapped photos of the symbols, her fingers trembling as she captured every detail. The figures depicted wolves and humans intertwined, their forms blurring together in a way that sent a chill down her spine. "These carvings tell the story of the first deal," Rhett said, his voice echoing softly in the chamber. "The pact my ancestors made with the mountain. It was supposed to be a gift, a way to protect our people. But the mountain never gives without taking something in return." Harper's gaze shifted to the pool of water. "What is that?" Rhett hesitated before answering. "The heart of the magic. The mountain's power flows through it. It is said that if you look into it, you'll see the truth about yourself, what the mountain wants from you." Harper felt an inexplicable pull toward the pool, her feet moving before she could stop herself. She knelt at the edge, her reflection staring back at her in the glass like surface. "Harper," Don T. Rhett began, but it was too late. She leaned closer, and the surface of the water rippled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then images began to form, fractured and hazy, like a dream. She saw the black wolf, its eyes glowing beneath the full moon. She saw Rhett, his face shadowed with anguish. She saw herself standing in the clearing, her camera in hand, as the wolves surrounded her. And then she saw something else. A figure stood at the edge of the forest, their face obscured but their presence undeniable. They held something in their hand, a blade etched with the same symbols carved into the cavern walls. The reflection dissolved, and Harper gasped, stumbling back. "What did you see?" Rhett asked, his voice urgent. Harper shook her head, her heart pounding. "I don't know." But it felt like a warning. Rhett's expression darkened. "The mountain doesn't warn. It chooses." The weight of his words settled over her, and Harper realized with chilling certainty the mountain wasn't done with her yet. Chapter 10, Bonds Forged in Fire. Harper's legs felt unsteady as she backed away from the shimmering pool. The visions still clung to her mind, vivid and impossible to ignore. The figure in the forest, the blade, the wolves, it all pointed to something coming, something she wasn't prepared for. Rhett stepped closer, his hand gently gripping her arm to steady her. "You shouldn't have looked," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I had to," Harper whispered, her voice trembling. "I needed to know." "And did you?" Rhett asked, his green eyes searching hers. Harper hesitated, her stomach twisting. "I think the mountain's trying to tell me something, but I don't know what it means." Rhett frowned, glancing toward the pool. "The mountain doesn't show you what you want. It shows you what you fear. What you'll have to face." Harper swallowed hard. "Then why did it show me you?" Rhett's expression softened, a flicker of guilt passing through his eyes. "Because I am part of this," he admitted. "Whatever the mountain wants from you, I am tied to it now, and that puts you in even more danger." Harper shook her head, stepping closer. "I am not afraid of you, Rhett." "You should be," he said quietly. The descent, the air in the cave, felt heavier as they made their way back to the entrance. Rhett's flashlight cast long shadows on the walls, the ancient carvings seeming to watch them as they passed. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain itself was aware of their every step, its energy pulsing through the ground beneath her feet. When they finally emerged into the fading light of dusk, Harper took a deep breath, the crisp air grounding her. But the tension in Rhett's posture hadn't eased. "What now?" she asked, adjusting her camera bag. "Now we prepare," Rhett said, his tone grim. "The mountain doesn't show visions like that without reason. Whatever's coming, it's not far off." They descended the trail in silence, the weight of their shared knowledge hanging between them. As they approached the cabin, Rhett suddenly stopped, his hand shooting out to grab Harper's wrist. "Wait," he said, his voice low. Harper froze, her eyes darting to where he was looking. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the clearing, the cabin, and the tree line beyond. But then, a faint glimmer of movement caught her attention. A figure stood near the edge of the woods, half hidden in the shadows. "Hunters," Rhett whispered. Harper's pulse quickened. She squinted, trying to make out details, but the figure turned and disappeared into the trees before she could get a clear look. "We can go back to the cabin," Rhett said, already moving. "They've found us." "Where do we go?" Harper asked, her heart pounding. Rhett glanced at the sky, the last rays of sunlight fading into twilight. The caves again. They 1T follow us there. A reckoning in the caves. By the time they reached the caves, night had fallen. The forest seemed alive, with sound branches snapping, leaves rustling, distant howls that set Harper's nerves on edge. Rhett moved quickly, his hand gripping hers as he led her into the safety of the cavern's depths. As soon as they were inside, Harper leaned against the wall, struggling to catch her breath. Why 1T they follow us here? They re superstitious, Rhett said. The hunters may not understand the magic, but they fear it. They know the caves are tied to the mountain's power, and they 1T risk crossing whatever line they think exists. Harper nodded, though the explanation did little to ease her fear. She glanced around the chamber, the carvings on the walls casting strange shadows in the flickering light of Rhett's flashlight. "Do you think they'll wait for us to leave?" she asked. "Probably," Rhett admitted. "But that gives us time to figure out our next move." Harper shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her. "What if there's no way out?" "There's always a way out," Rhett said, his voice steady. "We just have to find it." Strength in unity, they sat by the edge of the pool. The firelight from a small torch Rhett had lit dancing across the water's surface. Harper studied his face, the way the flickering light highlighted the hard lines of his jaw and the weariness in his eyes. "You've been fighting this for a long time," she said softly. Rhett glanced at her, his expression guarded. "Longer than I'd like to admit. You don't have to do it alone," Harper said, her voice firm. "Whatever's coming, we'll face it together." Rhett's gaze softened, and for a moment the tension in his posture eased. "You don't know what you're saying, Harper. This isn't your fight." "It is now," she said, leaning forward. "The mountain marked me, right? That means I am part of this whether I like it or not. So stop trying to push me away." Rhett let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You really are stubborn." Harper smiled faintly. "You just figuring that out?" The faintest hint of a smile touched his lips, but it quickly faded as his expression turned serious. "You're brave, Harper, I'll give you that. But bravery only gets you so far. Then it's a good thing I've got you," she said, her tone teasing but sincere. Rhett shook his head, though a small smile lingered. "You're something else, you know that. And you're not as scary as you think," Harper countered. Rhett's expression turned thoughtful, and for a moment the weight of his struggles seemed to lift. Harper felt a surge of warmth in her chest, a sense of connection that went beyond words. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The first strike, the peaceful moment, didn't last long. A sudden crack echoed through the cave, followed by a flash of light that sent shadows dancing wildly across the walls. Harper scrambled to her feet, her heart racing. What was that? Rhett's expression darkened, and he grabbed her arm, pulling her behind him. "Stay close." The sound came again, closer this time. Footsteps echoed through the cavern, accompanied by the faint hum of something unnatural. "They recoming," Rhett said, his voice low but tense. Harper's pulse quickened. "You said they wouldn't come in here." "They shouldn't," Rhett muttered, his green eyes narrowing. But if they've figured out a way to counter the mountain's magic, he didn't finish the thought. But Harper didn't need him to. The hunters weren't just after them, they were prepared. The hum grew louder, and Harper's chest tightened as a group of figures emerged from the shadows. They were dressed in dark, utilitarian gear, their faces obscured by masks. Each one carried a weapon that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light, the same symbols from the carvings etched into the blades and barrels. "Rhett," Harper whispered, her voice trembling. "I see them," Rhett said, his posture shifting as a low growl rumbled in his chest. The lead hunter stepped forward, their voice echoing coldly through the chamber. "You've run long enough, Wolf. It ends tonight." Harper gripped Rhett's arm, her fear threatening to overwhelm her. But as he stepped forward, his green eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, she saw something else in him. Resolve. And for the first time, Harper understood what the mountain had shown her. The fight wasn't just Rhett's. It was hers, too. Chapter 11, Whispers of Prophecy. The air in the cavern grew heavier as the hunters advanced, their weapons glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. The faint hum emanating from their blades reverberated through Harper's chest, setting her nerves on edge. "Stay behind me," Rhett growled, his voice low and commanding. Harper's grip on his arm tightened, but she didn't move. "I am not leaving you." "Harper, no," she said firmly, cutting him off. "We do this together." The lead hunter stopped just short of the pool, their masked face tilting slightly as if studying Rhett. The other hunters spread out in a half circle, their movements precise and deliberate. "Rhett Dalton," the leader said, their voice muffled but cold. "You've evaded us for years." Impressive, but ultimately futile. "Tonight, your time runs out." Rhett's green eyes glinted, his muscles coiled like a spring. "You've got a lot of nerve coming here," he said, his voice a growl. "The mountain doesn't take kindly to intruders." The hunter laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the chamber. "The mountain's power belongs to no one, not you. Not the wolves, not the magic. It's time someone claimed it for themselves." Harper's stomach churned as she realized what they meant. The hunters weren't just here for Rhett, they wanted control of the mountain's power. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Rhett said, stepping forward. "The magic here doesn't belong to anyone. It's alive, and it will destroy you before it lets you take it." "We'll see about that," the hunter replied. They raised their weapon, a blade that shimmered with runes eerily similar to those on the cave walls. "Your blood will seal our claim." A fight for survival, the first strike came swiftly. One of the hunters lunged toward Rhett, their blades slashing through the air. Rhett moved like lightning, sidestepping the attack and delivering a blow that sent the hunter sprawling. "Get back," he barked at Harper, his voice urgent. Harper hesitated for only a moment before retreating to the edge of the chamber. Her heart raced as the fight erupted around her, the cavern ringing with the clash of metal and the snarls of wolves. Rhett shifted before her eyes, his human form blurring into the powerful black wolf she had first seen under the full moon. His claws raked against one hunter's weapon, sending sparks flying, while his teeth sank into another's arm, disarming them with a savage twist. But the hunters were relentless, their coordination unnerving. They moved as a unit, their weapons glowing brighter as they chanted in a language Harper couldn't understand. The pool of water at the center of the chamber rippled, the glow from the hunters' weapons casting strange reflections on its surface. Harper's gaze flicked between the fight and the carvings on the walls, her mind racing. The hunters weren't just attacking Rhett. They were trying to tap into the mountain's magic. Harper's stand as one of the hunters raised their weapon, aiming it at Rhett. Harper acted on instinct. She grabbed a loose stone from the ground and hurled it with all her strength. The rock struck the hunter's arm, throwing off their aim and giving Rhett the opening he needed to take them down. Another hunter turned toward her, their blade glowing ominously. Harper backed away, her heart pounding, but her eyes caught on the carvings etched into the wall behind her. The symbols, the figures. They weren't just decorations, they were instructions. "Harper." Rhett's voice, rough and guttural in his wolf form, snapped her focus back to the fight. The lead hunter was advancing toward Rhett, their weapon raised high. The other hunters were chanting louder now, their voices resonating with a power that seemed to shake the cavern itself. Harper's gaze darted to the pool. The ripples had turned into waves, the surface shimmering with a blinding light. She didn't have time to think. She ran to the carvings, tracing her fingers over the symbols as she tried to piece together their meaning. Come on," she muttered under her breath. Her eyes landed on a figure at the center of the carvings, a woman standing before the pool, her hands raised in supplication. Surrounding her were wolves and hunters alike, their weapons lowered. It wasn't a battle. It was a ritual. "Harper, get out of here!" Rhett roared, his voice laced with pain. She ignored him, her fingers brushing against the carved runes. The Mountain S energy seemed to pulse through her, guiding her movements. The ritual Harper knelt by the pool, her hands trembling as she mimicked the figure from the carvings. She raised her hands over the water, her heart pounding as the Mountain S energy surged through her. The hunters' chanting faltered, their focus breaking as the light from the pool grew brighter. "What is she doing?" One of them shouted. "Stop her!" The leader barked. Rhett leapt in front of Harper, his massive form blocking the hunter's path. His growl was low and menacing, his green eyes glowing with a fierceness Harper had never seen before. The pool's light grew blinding, and Harper felt a wave of warmth wash over her. Images flashed through her mind, visions of the mountain, the wolves, the hunters, and the ancient power that bound them all. A voice, soft and ancient, whispered in her ear, "Restore the balance." Harper didn't know what it meant, but she followed her instincts. She reached into the pool, her fingers skimming the surface, and the energy around her erupted in a brilliant wave of light. The hunters cried out, their weapons falling from their hands as the cavern trembled. The chanting ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. When the light faded, Harper opened her eyes to find the hunters sprawled on the ground, their weapons dark and lifeless. The runes on the cavern walls glowed faintly, their power seemingly restored. Rhett shifted back into his human form, his breathing ragged as he staggered toward her. What did you do?" "I don't know," Harper admitted, her voice shaking. "But I think the mountain listened." Aftermath, the hunters, disarmed and dazed, scrambled to their feet and fled the cave without a word. Harper watched them go, her chest heaving as the adrenaline began to fade. Rhett knelt beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "You saved us," he said softly. Harper shook her head. "The mountain did, I didn't know. I did what I thought it wanted." Rhett's gaze softened, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Whatever you did, it worked." Harper looked at the pool, its surface now calm and clear. The Mountain S energy still thrummed faintly, a reminder that its power was far from dormant. "This isn't over," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "The hunters will come back. And the wolves we'll deal with it," Rhett said firmly. "Together." Harper met his gaze, her fear tempered by determination. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: the mountain had chosen her for a reason. And she wasn't going to let it down. Chapter 12. The rising threat. The days following the confrontation in the cave were a blur of preparation and unease. Harper and Rhett returned to the cabin, but neither of them felt at ease there. The hunters had retreated, but their presence lingered like a shadow over the mountain, a constant reminder that the fight was far from over. Harper sat at the table, poring over her photos and the notes she'd scrawled in a journal since arriving in Ash Hollow. Each image, each word was a puzzle piece she couldn't quite fit together. The Mountain S energy, the carvings in the cave, the whispers she'd heard in the pool, all of it pointed to something bigger, something she was only beginning to understand. Anything. Rhett's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced up to see him leaning in the doorway, his arms crossed and his expression wary. The bruises from their last fight had mostly faded, but he still moved with the stiffness of someone carrying unseen burdens. "Not yet," Harper admitted, closing her journal. "But I keep coming back to what the mountain said. Restore the balance. What does that even mean?" Rhett sighed, stepping into the room and sitting across from her. "The Mountain S balance has been off for a long time," he said. "The curse, the hunters, the wolves, it's all connected. But fixing it, that's not something anyone managed to do." Harper frowned. "You think it's impossible?" "I think it's dangerous," Rhett said, his green eyes locking onto hers. "And it's going to get worse before it gets better." A sign of trouble later that afternoon, Harper decided to venture back to the clearing where she had first seen the black wolf. She brought her camera, hoping to capture anything that might help her make sense of what was happening. Rhett insisted on coming with her, and though Harper didn't argue, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. He was quieter than usual, his gaze flicking toward the trees as if expecting an ambush at any moment. As they reached the clearing, Harper's stomach sank. The peaceful scene she remembered was gone. The grass was trampled, and deep claw marks scored the trees, their jagged edges still fresh. Rhett crouched by the edge of the clearing, his fingers brushing against the ground. "They've been here," he said grimly. "The wolves?" Harper asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Rhett said. He straightened, his expression dark. "And they weren't alone." Harper's chest tightened. "You mean the hunters?" Rhett nodded. "This wasn't just a random attack, they were working together." Harper stared at him, disbelief flooding her. "Why would the hunters team up with the wolves?" "I thought they were enemies." "They are," Rhett said, "but desperate people make desperate choices. If the hunters think the wolves can help them get what they want, control of the mountain's magic, they'll use them." And the wolves are angry enough to agree. Harper shivered, her mind racing. The thought of two dangerous forces joining together was almost too much to comprehend. "We need to figure out their next move," Rhett said, his voice tight. "Before it's too late." A glimmer of hope that night, Harper sat by the fireplace, her camera resting on her lap as she replayed the images she'd taken in the clearing. Each frame seemed to pulse with the tension she had felt there, the weight of the mountain's energy pressing down on her even now. Rhett sat across from her, sharpening a blade with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound of metal scraping against stone was almost hypnotic, a steady rhythm that grounded her in the present. "What if we were looking at this the wrong way?" Harper asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Rhett paused, his green eyes lifting to meet hers. "What do you mean?" "The hunters and the wolves, they after the mountain's magic, right?" Harper said. "But what if the mountain's trying to protect itself? What if the balance it wants isn't about fighting it's about stopping them from taking the magic in the first place?" Rhett frowned, his hand stilling. "You saying we didn't fight them?" "I am saying we outsmart them," Harper said, her voice gaining confidence. "The hunters think they can control the magic, but they don't understand it. We do, at least, more than they do. If we can figure out what the mountain really wants, maybe we can stop this without bloodshed." Rhett leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's a big maybe," he said. "And it's a gamble." Harper nodded. "But it's better than going in blind. We need to find the heart of the mountain's power, the source of the magic. If we can reach it before they do, we might have a chance," Rhett finished, his voice quiet. A dangerous journey, the decision was made. They would head deeper into the mountain, beyond the caves, to find the source of the magic. Rhett had heard rumors of its location, a place whispered about in stories passed down through generations of his family. "It's called the Vale," Rhett said as they prepared to leave the cabin. "A hidden valley at the mountain's peak. It's where the first deal was made, and where the curse started," Harper asked. Rhett nodded. "If there's any hope of breaking it, it's there." The journey would be treacherous, but Harper felt a strange sense of resolve. The mountain had chosen her for a reason, and she wasn't going to back down now. The first attack, they set out at dawn, the forest bathed in golden light. The trail was narrow and steep, winding through dense trees that seemed to close in around them. Harper kept her camera close, snapping photos as they went. But as the hours passed, the sense of unease grew. The forest felt too quiet, the usual sounds of birds and insects conspicuously absent. "We're not alone," Rhett muttered, his hand tightening around the hilt of his blade. Harper's stomach churned. "The hunters, maybe," Rhett said, "or worse." The attack came without warning. A blur of motion shot from the trees, and Harper barely had time to react as a massive wolf lunged at them. Rhett moved like lightning, intercepting the creature with a feral growl. The two collided in a whirlwind of claws and teeth, their snarls echoing through the forest. "Run!" Rhett shouted over his shoulder, but Harper didn't move. Instead, she raised her camera, snapping photos as fast as she could. If they survived this, the images might hold the answers they needed. More wolves appeared, their eyes glowing with feral intensity. Harper's heart raced as she realized they were surrounded. Rhett fought like a man possessed, his movements a perfect blend of human strategy and animal instinct. But even he couldn't hold off the pack alone. Harper's hands trembled as she reached for the fireplace poker strapped to her backpack, a makeshift weapon Rhett had insisted she carry. She swung it at the nearest wolf, her heart pounding as it yelped and backed off. "Stay close," Rhett yelled, his voice rough. Harper moved to his side, her grip tightening on the poker. They stood back to back, the wolves circling them like vultures. The fight wasn't over, but Harper knew one thing for sure. They weren't going down without a fight. Chapter 13, Betrayal in the Dark. The wolves circled, their glowing eyes slicing through the dim forest like burning embers. Harper's breath came in short gasps as she gripped the fireplace poker, her knuckles white. Behind her, Rhett's growl reverberated through the clearing, low and menacing. "We need to move," Rhett said, his voice rough. "There's no way out," Harper whispered back, her gaze darting between the wolves. Rhett shifted slightly, his shoulder brushing hers. "Then we make one." Before Harper could respond, the largest wolf lunged, its jaws snapping inches from her face. Rhett moved with lightning speed, intercepting it midair and slamming it to the ground. The two creatures tumbled in a blur of black fur and snarls, the ferocity of the fight making the other wolves hesitate. Harper swung the poker at another wolf that crept too close, the metal connecting with its side. It yelped and retreated, but the others pressed forward, their growls deepening. "Harper, run!" Rhett roared, pinning the alpha wolf to the ground. She didn't listen. Instead, she backed toward a fallen tree, her heart pounding as she kept her eyes on the pack. One wolf darted forward, snapping at her legs, but she struck it with the poker, her desperation fueling her strength. "Rhett, I can't leave you," she shouted, panic clawing at her throat. "You don't have a choice," Rhett growled, slamming the alpha wolf into a tree with bone-crunching force. The creature yelped, then limped back into the shadows. The momentary victory was short-lived. More wolves emerged from the forest, their forms blending with the darkness. Harper's stomach churned as she realized the pack wasn't retreating, they were regrouping. A hunter's trap, a sudden, sharp whistle split the air, freezing the wolves in their tracks. Harper's head snapped toward the source of the sound, her heart sinking as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was one of the hunters. The man was tall and broad, his face obscured by a mask etched with the same runes as the weapons they carried. In one hand he held a crossbow, its glowing bolts aimed directly at Rhett. "Well, isn't this a sight?" the hunter said, his voice muffled but mocking. The lone wolf and his new friend, cornered like rats. Rhett shifted back into his human form, his breathing ragged. "You shouldn't be here," he growled, his green eyes blazing. The hunter chuckled. "Oh, I think we should." "You've been running long enough, Rhett. And now you've brought someone else into your mess." Harper's chest tightened. "Leave him alone," she said, stepping in front of Rhett. The hunter tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over her. "Brave, aren't you? Or maybe just foolish." Harper's hands trembled, but she didn't move. "If you here for the mountain-s magic, you wasting your time. It won't let you take it." The hunter laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "You think you understand the mountain? You don't know the first thing about it." He raised the crossbow, aiming it at Harper's chest. Rhett stepped forward, his growl low and dangerous. "If you touch her, you'll regret it." The hunter didn't flinch. "Oh, I doubt that." Before Rhett could move, another figure stepped out of the shadows, a woman dressed in dark gear, her face uncovered. Harper's breath caught as recognition slammed into her. "Marcy," she whispered. The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Hello, Harper, it's been a while." Rhett stiffened. "You know her?" "She was a friend," Harper said, her voice trembling. "From before." "Friend-s a strong word," Marcy said, her tone laced with amusement. "Let us just say I've been keeping an eye on you. When I heard you were poking around the mountain, I couldn't resist coming to see for myself." Harper's mind reeled. You re one of them? A hunter? Marcy shrugged. You say that like it's a bad thing. Someone has to protect the world from things like him. She nodded toward Rhett. He not a monster, Harper said, her voice rising. Marcy's smile faded. That's where you re wrong, Harper. They all are. And if you re smart, you'll walk away now. Let us handle this. I am not walking away, Harper said, her voice firm. Marcy sighed, her expression turning almost pitying. Then you re as foolish as he is. Betrayal revealed the wolves seemed to sense the tension shifting. They stayed back, their glowing eyes flicking between the hunters and Rhett. You re-working with them? Rhett growled, his voice filled with disbelief. Marcy smirked. The wolves and I have a mutual understanding. They want the Mountain-S power, so do we. Together we can claim it and finally put an end to all of this. Harper shook her head. You don't know what you redoing. The mountain doesn't belong to anyone. If you try to take its power, it'll destroy you. Marcy's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. She raised her hand and the wolves sprang into action. Harper barely had time to react before they lunged, their snarls filling the air. Get down. Rhett shouted, shoving Harper out of the way. The fight erupted in a blur of motion. Rhett shifted again, his black fur bristling as he met the wolves head-on. Harper scrambled to her feet, her heart racing as she swung the poker at the nearest wolf, driving it back. Marcy and the other hunter moved toward the pool, their weapons glowing as they began chanting. The runes on their gear pulsed, the light growing brighter with every word. They trying to activate it, Rhett shouted, his voice rough and animalistic. Stop them. Harper didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward Marcy, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Marcy turned, her eyes widening in surprise as Harper tackled her to the ground. The two women struggled, their movements desperate and wild. You don't understand. Marcy hissed, her grip tightening on Harper's wrist. This is bigger than you. Bigger than him. I don't care. Harper shouted, slamming her elbow into Marcy's side. You not taking the mountain. Marcy cried out, releasing her hold. Harper grabbed the glowing blade she had dropped and turned toward the pool. The other hunter was still chanting, their voice growing louder as the energy in the air became suffocating. Harper stopped them. Rhett roared, his claws raking across a wolf's flank. Harper didn't think. She raised the blade and swung with all her strength, shattering the hunter's weapon. A deafening crack echoed through the clearing as the light from the runes extinguished, plunging the area into darkness. A temporary victory, the wolves froze, their eyes flickering as if the loss of magic had disoriented them. One by one, they retreated into the forest, their snarls fading into the distance. Marcy staggered to her feet, her expression a mix of rage and disbelief. You don't know what you've done, she spat. You right, Harper said, her chest heaving. But neither do you. Marcy glared at her for a moment before retreating with the other hunter, disappearing into the shadows. Harper turned to Rhett, who stood panting in his human form, his body battered but unbroken. You okay? She asked, her voice shaking. Rhett nodded, his green eyes meeting hers. You saved us. For now, Harper said, her gaze shifting to the pool. The Mountain-S power still pulsed faintly beneath the surface, its secrets far from revealed. This isn't over, Rhett said, his voice low. Harper nodded. I know. And as they left the clearing, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that the Mountain-S whispers were only growing louder and the real battle was yet to come. Chapter 14. The moonlit reckoning. The night air was sharp and cold as Harper and Rhett made their way back toward the cabin. Every step felt heavy, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on them. Harper's mind raced with questions about Marcy's betrayal and the hunter's relentless pursuit of the Mountain-S power. Rhett walked silently beside her, his jaw clenched and his shoulders tense. His green eyes flicked toward the darkened trees with every sound, his heightened senses on high alert. She was my friend, Harper said finally, her voice trembling. Marcy and we used to talk about dreams, about traveling the world, and now she asked this. She made her choice, Rhett said, his voice rough. And it's a dangerous one. You can trust her, Harper. Not anymore. Harper nodded, though the realization cut deep. Why would she team up with the wolves? It doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, Rhett said grimly. The hunters want the mountain's power, and the wolves think they can use the hunters to take control. It's an alliance of convenience, but it won't last. When one side gets what they want, they'll turn on the other. And we caught in the middle, Harper said, her voice bitter. Rhett stopped abruptly, his hand gripping her arm. We not caught, Harper. We fighting back. His words carried a conviction that sent a shiver down her spine. She met his gaze, the fire in his green eyes igniting something in her own chest. Then we need to be ready, she said firmly. A dangerous decision back at the cabin, Harper and Rhett reviewed their next steps. The mountain's power was at the center of everything: the hunter's obsession, the wolves' rage, and the curse that bound Rhett to the land. If they wanted to stop the escalating conflict, they needed to understand the mountain's magic fully. The veil, Rhett said, tracing a crude map he had sketched on the cabin's table. It's where the curse began, and it's where we'll find answers. Harper studied the map, her fingers brushing over the jagged peaks and narrow valleys Rhett had marked. If it's so important, why hasn't anyone gone there before now? They've tried, Rhett said. The veil doesn't let just anyone in. It's protected by magic, by the land, by whatever forces govern this place. You have to be chosen. Harper's breath caught. Chosen like you. Maybe, Rhett said, his voice quiet. Or maybe like you. The weight of his words settled over her, but before she could respond, a howl echoed in the distance, long and mournful. Harper stiffened, her heart pounding. They coming back, Rhett said, rising to his feet. His muscles tensed and his eyes flickered with a faint glow. They want to give us another chance to escape. Harper grabbed her bag, her camera slung over her shoulder. Then we leave now. Rhett nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. We'll head for the veil. It's the only place they want to follow, not yet. The veil's threshold, the journey to the veil, was grueling. The terrain grew steeper and more treacherous with every step, the forest giving way to jagged cliffs and narrow ledges. The moon hung low in the sky, its silver light casting eerie shadows across the rocky landscape. Harper's legs burned as she climbed, but she refused to slow down. Every step brought them closer to answers and farther from the danger pursuing them. Do you feel that? Rhett asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. Harper paused, her breath visible in the cold air. At first, she felt nothing unusual. But as she focused, a strange sensation washed over her, a hum, faint but insistent, like the mountain itself was alive. It's the magic, Rhett said, his green eyes scanning the cliffs ahead. We close. Harper nodded, her pulse quickening. How will we know when we've found it? Rhett glanced at her, his expression unreadable. You'll know. The veil, they crested a final ridge, and Harper's breath caught. Below them lay a hidden valley, shrouded in mist and illuminated by the moonlight. The trees here were ancient, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky like gnarled hands. In the center of the valley, a massive stone altar stood surrounded by a ring of glowing blue runes. This is it, Rhett said, his voice barely above a whisper. Harper felt a chill run down her spine. The veil exuded a raw, untamed power that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. She stepped forward, drawn to the altar as if by an invisible force. Rhett caught her arm. Careful, he warned. The mountain tests those who come here. Harper swallowed hard but nodded. She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the glowing runes. As she reached the altar, the hum of energy grew louder, the light intensifying until it bathed her in an ethereal glow. She placed her hand on the stone, and the world seemed to shift. A vision of the past Harper's surroundings dissolved, replaced by a vision of the mountain as it had been centuries ago. She saw Rhett's ancestors standing before the altar, their faces filled with desperation as they begged the mountain for its protection. She saw the magic take hold, transforming them into the first wolves, their howls echoing through the valley. But she also saw the price they paid, their freedom bound to the mountain, their lives entwined with its power. The vision shifted, and Harper saw the hunters, their faces obscured as they waged war against the wolves. She saw the mountain-s rage, its magic lashing out in a storm of fire and stone. And then she saw herself, standing at the altar, facing both the wolves and the hunters, her hands raised as the mountain-s power flowed through her. The vision ended abruptly, and Harper staggered back, gasping for breath. "Harper!" Rhett was at her side, his hands steadying her. "What did you see?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him. "I saw everything," she said. "The curse, the hunters, the mountain, it's all connected." Rhett's brow furrowed. "What does it mean?" "It means," Harper said, her voice trembling, "the mountain doesn't want us to fight. It wants us to end the cycle, to break the curse." Rhett's eyes widened, his expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Is that even possible?" Harper met his gaze, her determination solidifying. "I don't know, but we have to try." The wolves' return, a low growl echoed through the valley, and Harper turned to see shadows emerging from the mist. The wolves had followed them, their glowing eyes fixed on the altar. Rhett stepped in front of Harper, his body tense. "They won't let us leave without a fight." Harper's hand tightened around her camera, her heart pounding. The mountain had shown her the truth, and now it was time to act. "No," she said, stepping forward. "They don't want to fight either. They just don't know it yet." Harper don't Rhett began, but she silenced him with a glance. She raised her hands, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "The mountain chose me," she said, her words echoing through the valley. "And I choose to end this." The wolves hesitated, their growls softening. The energy in the valley shifted, the air growing still as if the mountain itself was listening. Harper turned to Rhett, her eyes blazing with determination. "We're going to finish this. Together." And as the wolves closed in, Harper felt the mountain-s power surge within her, a reminder that the battle for balance had only just begun. Chapter 15, The Forest Speaks. The wolves crept closer, their glowing eyes like flickering embers in the mist. Harper stood at the altar, her heart pounding, but her resolve was unshaken. The mountain-s energy coursed through her veins, a steady hum that anchored her in place. Beside her, Rhett shifted into his wolf form, his black fur bristling as he bared his teeth. He stepped forward protectively, placing himself between her and the pack. "Wait," Harper said softly, touching his shoulder. Rhett growled low in his throat, his glowing green eyes meeting hers. "Harper, they'll tear you apart." "No, they won't," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Not if we give them what they want." Rhett's wolf form stiffened, but he didn't move. Harper turned to the pack, raising her hands as she took a step closer to the edge of the altar. "You came here for the mountain-s power," she called, her voice carrying through the valley. "But it doesn't belong to you, or the hunters, or anyone. It belongs to all of us, to the mountain itself." The wolves halted, their heads tilting as if listening. Harper felt the air shift, the tension easing slightly, though the danger still loomed. One wolf stepped forward, larger than the rest, its silver fur shimmering in the moonlight. Its eyes glowed fiercely as it studied her, and Harper felt its presence like a weight pressing down on her chest. "Who is that?" she whispered to Rhett. "The alpha," Rhett said, his voice rough. "The leader of the pack. If you're going to convince them, it starts with him." The alpha-s test, the silver wolf moved closer, its eyes locked on Harper-s. She stood her ground, though every instinct in her screamed to run. The wolf stopped a few feet away, its head lowering as it growled softly. Harper took a deep breath. "I am not your enemy," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The hunters want to use you. They'll betray you the moment you've served your purpose. But if you work with us, we can end this. Together." The alpha wolf's growl deepened and Harper's chest tightened. She wasn't sure if it understood her words, but it was listening. She could feel it in the air, the way the mountain-s energy seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. "What do you want?" Harper asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The wolf tilted its head, and for a moment the air seemed to still. Then it stepped closer, lowering its massive head until its glowing eyes were level with hers. Harper's breath caught as a flood of images filled her mind, visions of the wolves, the hunters, and the mountain's ancient magic. She saw the first wolves standing before the altar, their bodies twisted by the curse. She saw the hunters waging war, their weapons cutting through the forest. And she saw herself, standing at the center of it all, her hands raised as the mountain's power flowed through her. The vision ended abruptly, and Harper staggered back, her legs trembling. "What did you see?" Rhett asked, his wolf form shifting back into his human shape. Harper met his gaze, her voice trembling. "They retied to the mountain just like you are. The cursed's not just about power. It's about control. The wolves are as much victims as anyone else." Rhett's expression darkened. "So what do? We break the cycle," Harper said, her determination solidifying. "But we need their help to do it." The mountain's gift, the alpha wolf, let out a low, rumbling growl, and the rest of the pack stilled. Harper could feel the weight of their attention, their glowing eyes fixed on her as if waiting for something. She turned to the altar, her gaze sweeping over the glowing runes and the pool of shimmering water. The mountain's energy surged within her, and for the first time she felt a glimmer of understanding. "This altar," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "It's not just where the curse began. It's where it can end." Rhett frowned. "How?" "The mountain's magic is a balance," Harper said, her mind racing as she pieced it together. "The curse came from taking too much, from demanding power without giving anything in return. If we want to break it, we have to restore that balance. And how do we do that?" Rhett asked, his voice wary. Harper looked at him, her heart pounding. "We give the mountain what it's been missing. An offering." The sacrifice. Harper stepped toward the altar, her hands trembling as she placed them on the stone. The runes flared to life beneath her touch, their blue light spreading across the surface like veins of fire. The energy surged through her, powerful and overwhelming, but she didn't pull away. "Harper, stop," Rhett said, his voice filled with alarm. "You don't know what this will do." "I have to," Harper said, her voice shaking but resolute. "The mountain chose me, Rhett. If this is what it takes to end the curse, then I'll do it." "No," Rhett said, stepping closer. "You're not doing this alone." The alpha wolf growled softly, its gaze shifting between them. Harper felt its presence like a steady drumbeat in her mind, urging her forward. As the rune's light grew brighter, Harper felt the mountain's energy pulling her in, binding her to the magic that had shaped this place for centuries. "I see it now," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The mountain doesn't want power. It wants harmony. It wants its magic to be shared, not stolen." Rhett reached for her, his hand closing over hers on the altar. "If you're redoing this, I am with you." Their gazes locked, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. The wolves gathered around the altar, their glowing eyes watching as the runes pulsed with light. Together, Harper and Rhett focused their energy, their connection to the mountain growing stronger with every passing second. The air around them shimmered, the light from the altar enveloping them in a blinding glow. And then, with a sound like a rushing wind, the magic surged outward, spreading through the valley in a wave of brilliant light. A new beginning. When the light faded, Harper collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. Rhett was beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly. The wolves stood silently around them, their eyes no longer glowing but calm and clear. The alpha wolf stepped forward, its massive head lowering until it touched Harper's hand. "You did it," Rhett said softly, his voice filled with awe. Harper looked at the altar, the runes now dim but peaceful. The energy of the mountain was still there, but it felt different, balanced, quiet, no longer a storm waiting to break. "It's not over," Harper said, her voice trembling. "But it's a start." Rhett nodded, his green eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before, hope. As they left the valley, the wolves following silently behind them, Harper felt the Mountain S presence lingering in her mind, a quiet reminder of the power they had restored. The balance was fragile, but it was theirs to protect. And for the first time, Harper felt like she belonged not just to the mountain, but to the world it was trying to heal. Chapter 16, Blood and Betrayal. The descent from the veil was eerily silent, the air heavy with the weight of what Harper and Rhett had just done. The wolves followed at a distance, their once feral energy tempered by a strange calm. Harper's body ached, every step feeling like a monumental effort, but her mind was sharper than ever. The Mountain-S magic still pulsed faintly within her, a steady reminder of the connection she had forged. "Do you feel that?" Harper asked, glancing at Rhett. Rhett nodded, his green eyes flicking toward the trees. It's different now. The Mountain-S energy it's not as wild. But that doesn't mean we safe. Harper frowned. The hunters 1T stop, will they? No, Rhett said grimly. If anything, they'll double down. They'll see what happened at the Vale as a threat, and they'll come after you for it. Harper swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. The memory of Marcy's betrayal burned in her mind, the hurt mingling with anger. We have to stop them before they get another chance. Rhett nodded. And we will. But first, we need to figure out their next move. An unlikely ally by the time they reached the edge of the forest, the sky was painted in shades of gold and amber. Harper and Rhett paused to catch their breath, their exhaustion evident in every movement. The wolves stopped at the tree line, their leader a massive silver alpha stepping forward. It fixed its glowing eyes on Harper, its expression unreadable. "What now?" Harper asked, her voice tinged with unease. The alpha lowered its head, a gesture of acknowledgement that sent a shiver down her spine. Slowly, it turned and disappeared into the shadows, the rest of the pack following silently behind. "They leaving?" Harper asked, her confusion evident. "They giving us space," Rhett said, his tone thoughtful. "For now. They know the hunters are still a threat. And they trust us to handle it." "They don't trust anyone," Rhett said. "But they understand that the Mountain-S balance is tied to us now. They'll wait to see what we do next." The hunters' ambush Harper and Rhett continued toward the cabin, the weight of exhaustion making every step feel heavier. But as they approached the clearing, a sudden crack of a branch made them freeze. "Someone's here," Rhett said, his voice low. Harper's heart raced as she scanned the tree line, her fingers instinctively tightening around the strap of her camera bag. The forest was too quiet, the usual hum of life replaced by an oppressive silence. Then a figure stepped into view. "Marcy," Harper whispered, her chest tightening. The woman stood at the edge of the clearing, her dark gear blending with the shadows. Her expression was cold, her hands resting on the hilt of a glowing blade. "You should be left when you had the chance," Marcy said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Rhett stepped forward, his body tense. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here." Marcy's gaze shifted to him, her smile devoid of humor. "And you've got a lot of nerve thinking you can take what belongs to the mountain." Harper clenched her fists. "We didn't take anything. We restored the balance. You saw what happened at the Vale." Marcy's expression darkened. "What I saw was you handing the Mountain-S power over to him." She nodded toward Rhett. "You think that S balance? It's a mistake, one I intend to fix." Harper's stomach churned. "You don't understand, no," Marcy said sharply. "You don't understand. The mountain doesn't need protectors like him. It needs control, order. And the hunters will bring that." Rhett growled low in his throat. "You just like the wolves trying to take something that was never yours to begin with." Marcy's smile returned, cold and sharp. "Then I guess it's a good thing I am not alone." The clearing erupted in chaos as more hunters emerged from the shadows, their weapons glowing with the same unnatural light as before. Harper barely had time to react before one of them lunged at Rhett, their blades slashing through the air. "Get back!" Rhett shouted, intercepting the attack. Harper stumbled, her heart pounding as the fight broke out around her. She reached for her camera bag, pulling out the fireplace poker Rhett had insisted she carry. The hunters moved with precision, their blades cutting through the air with deadly intent. Rhett fought like a force of nature, his wolf form a blur of black fur and claws. But the hunters' numbers were overwhelming, their coordination making it nearly impossible to gain the upper hand. Harper swung the poker at a hunter who got too close, the impact sending them staggering back. But as she turned, she saw Marcy advancing toward her, a blade in hand and determination etched on her face. "The cost of betrayal don't make me do this, Marcy," Harper said, her voice trembling. "You already made your choice," Marcy said coldly. "Now it's time for me to make mine." Marcy lunged, her blade flashing in the dim light. Harper dodged, her heart racing as she swung the poker in a desperate attempt to defend herself. The clash of metal against metal rang out, the force of Marcy's attack driving Harper back. Harper stumbled, her foot catching on a root as she fell to the ground. Marcy loomed over her, her blade raised. "You were always too soft, Harper," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "That's why you'll lose." Before Marcy could strike, a blur of motion slammed into her, sending her sprawling. Harper gasped as Rhett stood over her, his wolf form bristling with fury. "You don't touch her," Rhett growled, his voice rough and guttural. Marcy scrambled to her feet, her expression a mix of rage and fear. She glanced at the other hunters, who were faltering under Rhett's relentless assault. "This isn't over," Marcy spat, backing away. "You can protect her forever." Rhett snarled, and Marcy retreated into the shadows, the remaining hunters following her. Aftermath, the clearing fell silent, the air heavy with the scent of blood and earth. Harper sat on the ground, her hands shaking as she tried to catch her breath. "Are you okay?" Rhett asked, shifting back into his human form. Harper nodded, though her voice trembled. "I think so." Rhett helped her to her feet, his green eyes scanning the trees for any sign of the hunters. "They'll be back," he said grimly. "And next time they hold back." Harper swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. "Then we need to be ready." Rhett met her gaze, his expression softening. "You were brave tonight, Harper, but this fight isn't just about us anymore. It's about the mountain, the wolves, everything." Harper nodded, her grip tightening on the poker. "I am not giving up." Not now. And as the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Harper knew one thing for certain: the battle for the mountain had only just begun. Chapter 17, The Wolf Within the Morning Light, cast long shadows over the clearing as Harper and Rhett returned to the cabin, both weary but resolute. The air was heavy with the memory of the battle, the scent of earth and blood lingering like a haunting reminder. Harper dropped her camera bag onto the table and sank into a chair, her body aching from the fight. She rubbed her temples, trying to piece together their next move. Across from her, Rhett paced restlessly, his jaw tight and his green eyes flickering with frustration. "They'll regroup," Rhett said, his voice low. "Marcy and the hunters stop until they've taken what they want." Harper looked up at him, her exhaustion giving way to determination. "We let them." Rhett stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Harper, this isn't just about fighting them. It's about surviving what comes next. The mountain's power, it's changing everything." "Even the wolves are different now." Harper frowned. "Different how?" "They recalmer," Rhett said, leaning against the counter, more focused. "It's like they've been grounded. But that doesn't mean they'll stay that way." Harper shivered, remembering the silver alpha wolf's piercing gaze. "Do you think they'll turn on us?" Rhett hesitated. "I didn't know. The mountain might have restored balance, but it didn't erase the curse. The wolves are still tied to it, and so am I." The weight of the curse as the day wore on, Harper found herself watching Rhett more closely. He moved with a restless energy, his every motion tense and deliberate, as though he was holding something back. "Rhett," she said finally, breaking the silence. "What aren't you telling me?" Rhett froze, his back to her. For a long moment he didn't respond. Then he turned, his expression guarded. The mountain S magic isn't just in the wolves, he said. It S in me. And since the veil, it S been stronger, louder. Harper's chest tightened. Louder how? Rhett clenched his fists, his green eyes flashing with a faint glow. I feel it pulling at me. The wolf, it S harder to control now. Like the mountain is testing me, pushing me to see how far I can go before I lose myself. Harper stood, crossing the room to stand in front of him. You 1T lose yourself, Rhett. You re stronger than that. Rhett's gaze softened, but the tension in his body didn't ease. I thought I was. But the mountain doesn't just want balance, it wants a guardian. Someone who can protect its power. And I think it's trying to make me that. Harper's breath caught. You think the mountain S trying to change you? Rhett nodded. And if it does, I don't know if I'll come back from it. A glimpse of the wolf that evening, Rhett left the cabin to patrol the perimeter. Harper stayed behind, her mind racing with everything he had told her. The mountain S magic, the curse, the wolves, it all felt like an insurmountable weight. But she wasn't about to give up. As night fell, a low howl echoed through the forest. Harper froze, her heart pounding as the sound grew closer. She grabbed the fireplace poker, her grip tightening as she moved to the window. At first, she saw nothing. The clearing was still, bathed in the pale light of the moon. But then a shadow moved at the edge of the trees and her breath caught. It was Rhett. His wolf form stepped into the clearing, his black fur shimmering under the moonlight. But something about him was different. His movements were slower, more deliberate, and his glowing green eyes seemed to burn brighter than ever. Rhett, Harper whispered, stepping outside. The wolf turned to her, his gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, she saw the man she knew, the fierce protector who had stood by her side through every challenge. But beneath that, she saw something else. The wolf. Are you okay? Harper asked, her voice trembling. Rhett growled softly, a low, rumbling sound that sent a shiver down her spine. He stepped closer, his massive form towering over her. Harper stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. It's me, she said softly. You don't have to fight this alone. The wolf's growl faded and Rhett's eyes softened. Slowly, he shifted back into his human form, his breathing ragged and his shoulders slumping. I am sorry, he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't mean to scare you. You didn't, Harper said, though her hands still trembled. But Rhett, this is getting worse. The mountain S pulling at you, changing you. Rhett nodded, his jaw tightening. And if I can stop it? Harper reached for his hand, her grip firm. Then I'll help you, whatever it takes. A plan for the future. The next morning, Harper and Rhett sat at the table, a map of the mountains spread between them. Harper traced her fingers over the Vale's location, her mind spinning with possibilities. We need to go back, she said, glancing at Rhett. To the Vale? Rhett asked, his brow furrowing. Why? Because the answers are there, Harper said. The mountain S trying to tell us something. It showed me visions. It's pulling at you. If we can figure out what it wants, maybe we can stop this. Rhett hesitated, his green eyes searching hers. It's a risk, Harper. The hunters will be looking for us, and the wolves might not be so friendly next time. I know, Harper said. But if we don't try, the mountain S power will keep growing, and so will the danger. We don't have a choice. Rhett sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. You re stubborn, you know that? Harper smiled faintly. I've been told. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. All right, we'll go back. But this time we re not just looking for answers. We re finding a way to end this for good. Harper nodded, her determination solidifying. Together. Together, Rhett agreed, his voice steady. As they prepared for the journey, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain S whispers were growing louder, its magic stirring in ways she couldn't yet understand. Whatever awaited them at the Vale, it would test them both and the bond they had forged. Chapter 18, the final stand. The journey back to the Vale was a battle in itself. The terrain was treacherous, the air colder, and every sound in the forest felt like a warning. Rhett led the way, his movements careful and deliberate, his senses on high alert. Harper followed close behind, her camera bag slung over one shoulder and a makeshift weapon, a sturdy branch sharpened at one end, gripped tightly in her hand. "We being followed," Rhett murmured, his green eyes scanning the shadows. Harper's heart skipped. "The hunters, or the wolves," Rhett said. "Either way, we need to move fast." They pressed on, climbing steep ridges and weaving through dense underbrush. The weight of the mountain's magic was palpable, a pulsing energy that seemed to grow stronger with every step. "Do you feel that?" Harper asked as they reached a narrow ledge overlooking the valley below. Rhett nodded. "The mountain knows we coming. It's watching." Harper shivered, but didn't he stop. She had seen the visions, felt the mountain's pull, and she knew they were running out of time. The hunters strike as they neared the vale's entrance. A sudden rustling in the trees made them freeze. Rhett's posture shifted instantly, his muscles tensing as a low growl escaped his throat. "Harper, stay close," he warned. Before she could respond, a glowing bolt shot through the air, striking the ground inches from Rhett's feet. The blast sent dirt and debris flying, and Harper stumbled back, her ears ringing. "They found us," Rhett snarled, shifting into his wolf form in a blur of black fur. Hunters emerged from the shadows, their weapons glowing with runes that pulsed with an unnatural light. Marcy was among them, her face uncovered and her expression steely. "End of the road, Rhett," she called, her voice cold. "You and your little friend can outrun us anymore." Rhett's growl deepened, his eyes blazing as he crouched low, ready to attack. "Marcy, don't do this," Harper shouted, stepping forward despite the fear clawing at her chest. "The mountain's power isn't something you can control, it'll destroy you," Marcy sneered. "We don't need to control it. We just need to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." "You think the hunters are the right hands?" Harper shot back. "You've seen what they do, they didn't care about balance or protecting anyone. They just want power." "Better us than them," Marcy said, gesturing toward Rhett. Another hunter raised their weapon, aiming at Rhett, and Harper acted on instinct. She threw herself in front of him, raising her sharpened branch defensively. "Don't," she cried. The hunter hesitated, but Marcy didn't. She fired a bolt that narrowly missed Harper, grazing her arm and sending a searing pain shooting through her body. "Harper!" Rhett roared, his voice guttural as he lunged at Marcy. The clearing erupted into chaos. Rhett tore through the hunters with a feral intensity, his movements precise and brutal. Harper scrambled to her feet, clutching her injured arm as she searched for cover. Marcy advanced toward the altar, her blade glowing brighter with every step. Harper's chest tightened as she realized what was happening. Marcy wasn't just here to kill Rhett, she was here to take the mountain's power for herself. The mountain awakens, Harper forced herself to her feet, the pain in her arm a dull throb as adrenaline took over. She grabbed her camera bag, her fingers brushing against the lens as an idea sparked in her mind. She turned toward the altar, where the glowing runes had begun to pulse in response to Marcy's approach. The mountain's magic was stirring, its energy filling the air like an electric charge. "Stop!" Harper shouted, her voice breaking through the din. Marcy froze, turning to glare at her. "You don't get it, do you? The mountain's power is wasted on people like him," she spat, nodding toward Rhett. "It needs someone strong enough to wield it." "You're wrong," Harper said, stepping closer. "The mountain doesn't need a master, it needs balance. And if you take its power, you'll destroy everything it's trying to protect." Marcy sneered. "Then I guess you'll have to stop me." The hunters surrounded Harper, their weapons raised. Rhett fought to break free, but the sheer number of opponents slowed him down. Harper's pulse raced, but she forced herself to focus. She pulled her camera from the bag, her fingers moving instinctively as she aimed it at the altar. "Let us see if the mountain likes being watched," she murmured. She snapped the shutter, the flash illuminating the clearing in a blinding burst of light. The runes flared in response, their glow intensifying as the mountain's magic surged outward. The hunters faltered, their weapons dimming as the energy around them shifted. Marcy's expression twisted in confusion and fear as the altar's light engulfed her. "What's happening?" She shouted, stumbling back. "The mountain's choosing," Harper said, her voice steady despite the chaos. The mountain's judgment. The energy in the clearing coalesced into a single blinding beam that shot upward, splitting the sky. The hunters cried out, their weapons clattering to the ground as the runes burned brighter. Marcy fell to her knees, her blade slipping from her hand. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't how it's supposed to be." The mountain's magic surged toward her, surrounding her in a glowing aura. Harper held her breath, unsure of what would happen next. The magic pulsed once, then dissipated, leaving Marcy slumped on the ground. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear as the glowing runes dimmed. "It's over," Harper said softly, lowering her camera. The remaining hunters fled into the forest, their resolve shattered. Marcy stayed where she was, her body trembling as she stared at the altar. Rhett approached Harper, his breathing ragged but steady. His human form was bloodied and bruised, but his green eyes shone with relief. "You did it," he said, his voice rough. Harper shook her head. "The mountain did. I just gave it a push." Aftermath. As dawn broke, the clearing was quiet once more. The altar's runes glowed faintly, their energy subdued but peaceful. Harper and Rhett stood side by side, their exhaustion mingling with a quiet sense of victory. Marcy sat near the edge of the clearing, her head in her hands. She had lost everything: her allies, her mission, her faith in the hunters. Harper approached her cautiously, her voice gentle. "Marcy," she said. Marcy looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong," she whispered. Harper nodded. "It's not too late to make it right." Marcy didn't respond, but Harper saw a flicker of hope in her expression. As they left the clearing, Harper felt the mountain's presence like a steady heartbeat, its energy no longer raging but calm and steady. The battle was over for now. But Harper knew their journey wasn't. The mountain had chosen her and Rhett to protect its balance, and that responsibility would follow them wherever they went. For the first time, though, Harper felt ready. Together, she and Rhett would face whatever came next. Chapter 19, The Quiet Before the Storm. The days after the battle at the Vale passed in a haze of uneasy peace. Harper and Rhett returned to the cabin, both physically and emotionally drained. The mountain's energy had quieted, but its presence was ever present, like a low hum that lingered just beneath the surface of everything. Harper found herself replaying the events in her mind: the blinding light of the altar, the hunter's retreat, and the way Marcy had broken under the weight of her failure. There was satisfaction in knowing they had stopped the hunters, but Harper couldn't shake the sense that their victory was temporary. "They'll regroup," Rhett said one evening as they sat by the fire. His wounds had mostly healed, but the shadows under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. "I know," Harper said softly, her gaze fixed on the flames. "But so will we." Rhett gave her a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You've changed, you know. When I met you, you were just a photographer looking for inspiration. Now you re something else." Harper turned to him, her expression serious. "You rewrite. I am not the same, neither of us are." "But that's what the mountain wanted, isn't it? To change us." Rhett sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe. But change isn't always a good thing, Harper. Sometimes it takes more than it gives." Harper didn't respond, but Rhett's words stayed with her long after the fire burned low. A warning from the wolves. The next morning, Harper ventured out alone, her camera slung over her shoulder. She needed space to think, to process everything that had happened. The forest was quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. She reached the edge of a small clearing, her breath catching as she saw a familiar figure waiting for her. The silver alpha wolf stood in the center, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Harper froze, her pulse quickening, but the wolf didn't move. Instead, it tilted its head, a soft whine escaping its throat. "What do you want?" Harper asked, her voice trembling. The wolf took a step closer, then another, before lowering its massive head. Harper hesitated, then knelt, her hand hovering above its fur. The wolf didn't flinch, and she placed her hand gently on its head. A rush of energy surged through her, and her vision blurred. The forest around her dissolved into swirling light and shadow. Harper found herself standing in a vast, barren landscape, the sky above her swirling with dark clouds. She saw wolves howling in the distance, their cries mournful and haunting. She saw hunters advancing with weapons drawn, their faces obscured but their intent clear. And she saw herself standing between them, the mountain-s energy flowing through her. A voice echoed in her mind, deep and resonant. The balance is fragile. They will return. Prepare. The vision shifted, and Harper saw Rhett standing at the edge of the veil, his eyes glowing brighter than ever. Behind him, the altar pulsed with light, the runes flaring as though warning of something yet to come. The vision ended abruptly, and Harper gasped, stumbling back. The silver wolf was gone, leaving her alone in the clearing. She sat on the ground, her chest heaving as she tried to make sense of what she had seen. "They coming back," she whispered. "And it's going to be worse." Preparing for war, Harper returned to the cabin, her heart racing as she recounted the vision to Rhett. He listened intently, his expression darkening with every word. "It makes sense," he said when she finished. "The hunters lost their chance at the veil, but they not going to stop. If anything, they'll come back with more firepower and a plan." "And the wolves?" Harper asked. "The Alpha gave me the vision, but what does it mean? Are they going to help us?" Rhett hesitated. "I don't know." "The wolves follow the mountain-s will, but they still wild. If the hunters threaten the balance, the wolves might attack them or they might attack us. We can rely on them." Harper bit her lip, frustration bubbling in her chest. "Then what do? We can just wait for them to come back." "We don't wait," Rhett said, his voice firm. "We take the fight to them." Gathering allies over the next few days, Harper and Rhett prepared for what felt like an inevitable battle. They scouted the forest, marking key locations where they could hold their ground. Rhett shifted into his wolf form often, using his heightened senses to track signs of hunters or wolves nearby. Harper, meanwhile, reached out to the wolves in her own way. She spent hours in the forest, following trails and leaving offerings near the clearing where she had first seen the silver alpha. She didn't know if they would respond, but she had to try. One afternoon, as she sat by the edge of the clearing, she felt a presence behind her. Turning slowly, she saw the alpha wolf watching her from the shadows. "You came back," Harper said softly. The wolf stepped forward, its glowing eyes locked on hers. It didn't speak, but Harper felt its message as clearly as if it had. "We will be there when the time comes." The storm breaks the morning of the battle dawned cold and gray, the forest shrouded in mist. Harper and Rhett stood near the veil, their weapons ready. The altar pulsed faintly in the distance, its light a steady reminder of the mountain-s presence. "They'll come for the altar," Rhett said. "It's the key to everything." Harper nodded, her heart pounding. "Then we make sure they don't take it." As the first figures emerged from the trees, Harper's breath caught. The hunters moved in formation, their weapons glowing with the same runes that had marked their last attack. Marcy led them, her face a mask of determination. Behind them, shadows shifted, and Harper's stomach churned as she realized the hunters weren't alone. Wolves, feral and snarling, moved in their ranks, their eyes wild with rage. "They've turned some of the pack," Rhett growled, his voice rough with anger. Harper tightened her grip on her weapon. "Then we fight." The forest erupted into chaos as the hunters charged, their weapons blazing. Rhett shifted into his wolf form, a blur of black fur and claws as he met them head-on. Harper stayed close, her camera flashing as she documented the fight, the mountain-s energy pulsing through her like a second heartbeat. The battle for the mountain had begun, and Harper was ready to face it. Chapter 20, the heart of the mountain, the forest, transformed into a war zone, the clash of wolves, hunters, and mountain magic reverberating through the air. Harper's camera hung forgotten at her side as she swung her sharpened branch at a feral wolf lunging toward her. It yelped and retreated, but another took its place, its glowing eyes locked on her. Rhett was a blur of motion nearby, his wolf form tearing through hunters and feral wolves alike. His black fur shimmered with energy, the mountain-s power coursing through him as he fought to protect the veil. Harper ducked as a glowing blade swung toward her, the hunter-s attack missing by inches. She rolled to her feet, thrusting the branch forward and catching the hunter off guard. He stumbled back, and Harper seized the moment to retreat toward the altar, her heart pounding. The glowing runes on the stone pulsed in time with her racing heartbeat, their light intensifying as the battle raged on. The mountain was awake, its power alive and responding to the chaos around it. Harper, Red's voice, deep and guttural, broke through the noise. She turned to see him grappling with Marcy, the two locked in a fierce struggle. Marcy's blade glowed brighter than the others, the runes etched into its surface pulsating with an unnatural light. She struck at Rhett with relentless precision, forcing him back toward the edge of the clearing. "Rhett!" Harper screamed, her fear drowning out all other thoughts. A desperate choice, Harper sprinted toward the fight, weaving through the chaos as the mountain-s energy surged around her. She reached Marcy just as the hunter raised her blade for a final strike. Without thinking, Harper grabbed a stone from the ground and hurled it with all her strength. The rock struck Marcy's hand, knocking the blade free. Rhett roared, his massive form tackling her to the ground. "Enough!" Harper shouted, stepping between them. Rhett shifted back into his human form, his chest heaving as he glared at Marcy. She lay on the ground, blood dripping from a cut on her temple, her eyes filled with fury and defiance. "You don't understand what you're redoing," Marcy hissed, her voice shaking. "The mountain-s power is too dangerous to leave unchecked. It has to be controlled." "You're wrong," Harper said, her voice steady. "The mountain doesn't need control. It needs harmony, and your obsession with power is what's breaking the balance." Marcy's laugh was bitter. "Harmony, you think you can reason with magic. You're a fool, Harper." "Maybe," Harper said, stepping closer to the altar. "But the mountain chose me. And it didn't choose you." The mountain-s power as Harper placed her hands on the altar, the runes flared to life, their light spreading across the clearing like ripples on a pond. The air grew heavy, charged with a force that made her skin tingle. The feral wolves froze, their snarls turning to whines as they backed away from the light. The hunters hesitated, their weapons dimming as the energy around them shifted. Even Marcy's expression changed, her anger giving way to fear. "What's happening?" Rhett asked, his voice filled with awe. Harper closed her eyes, the mountain-s energy flowing through her like a river. She saw visions, flashes of the past, and glimpses of what could be. She saw the wolves, the hunters, and herself standing at the center of it all. "Restore the balance," the mountain whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. Harper took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. She raised her hands, the light from the altar responding to her movements. "Enough," she shouted, her voice ringing out across the clearing. "This ends now." Breaking the cycle, the light surged outward, enveloping the clearing in a blinding glow. Harper felt the mountain-s magic pouring into her, a force so immense it threatened to overwhelm her. She focused on the vision the mountain had shown her, the balance that had been broken, the harmony it longed to restore. She directed the energy toward the feral wolves, the light wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. Their snarls faded, their glowing eyes dimming as the rage in them ebbed away. They collapsed to the ground, their forms shifting back into humans, tired, confused, but alive. The hunters dropped their weapons, their faces pale as the magic swept over them. Harper saw their fear, their uncertainty, and she spoke with the mountain-s voice you sought to take what was never yours. "The mountain does not belong to you or anyone. Leave this place and never return." The hunters hesitated, their leader staring at Harper with a mixture of awe and defiance. But as the light pulsed again, stronger this time, they turned and fled into the forest, their retreat swift and silent. Marcy remained, her expression a storm of emotions. She stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Harper," she whispered, her voice raw. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to let it take you." Harper met her gaze, her heart aching. "I am not letting it take me, Marcy. I am giving it what it always needed, balance." Marcy's face crumpled, but she said nothing. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. A new dawn as the light from the altar faded. Harper collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion. Rhett was at her side in an instant, his hands steadying her. "Harper," he said softly, his green eyes filled with worry. "Are you okay?" She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's done." The clearing was silent, the mountain-s energy calm and steady. The wolves who had been freed from their feral forms stood together, their expressions filled with gratitude and wonder. The silver alpha stepped forward, its glowing eyes meeting Harper's. It bowed its massive head, a gesture of respect that brought tears to her eyes. "They'll protect the mountain now," Rhett said, his voice quiet. "The balance is restored." Harper looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "We did it," she said. Rhett nodded, his hand brushing hers. "Yeah, we did." Epilogue: weeks later, Harper stood at the edge of the clearing, her camera in hand. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, the air fresh and filled with promise. Rhett stood beside her, his green eyes scanning the horizon. The tension that had once weighed on him was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. "What now?" Harper asked, lowering her camera. Rhett smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him in weeks. "We protect the balance, and we make sure no one tries to break it again." Harper nodded, her heart light despite the challenges that lay ahead. The mountain-s magic was no longer a burden, it was a part of her, a reminder of the strength she had found in herself and the bond she had forged with Rhett. As they turned and walked back into the forest, Harper felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The battle was over, but their story was just beginning. And for the first time, she was ready for whatever came next.